Welcome. Welcome to the stillness of the night. Here at NightSleepWhisper. Tonight, we are stepping away from the noise of the outside world and letting go of the day's exhaustion. I invite you into the stormy, yet captivating corridors of Silver Oak Manor. In this immersive 50-chapter journey of mystery, we will follow Detective Elena in search of a lost masterpiece, the Golden Bird. As the secrets unfold, allow your mind to slowly drift into calm. Now, lean back, close your eyes if you wish, and focus only on my voice. Our story begins. Elena sat at her wooden desk. Her office was small but very clean. She was a security expert. She helped people protect their homes and their treasures. She liked her job because she was very good at solving problems. Elena was 35 years old and lived alone in the busy city. She was a serious woman with short, dark hair and sharp eyes. The morning was quiet. Elena drank a cup of hot coffee and looked at the clock. Suddenly, she saw a letter on the floor under her door. The mail had arrived. There was only one envelope. The paper was thick, heavy, and very expensive. It was white with gold letters on the front. Elena picked it up and opened it slowly. The letter said, "Dear Ms. Elena, my name is Arthur Vance. I live at Silver Oak Manor. I have a very important painting in my house. It is called the Golden Bird. I am afraid. I think someone wants to steal it. I need your help. Please come to my house this Friday. I will pay you very well for your time. Sincerely, Arthur Vance." Elena knew the name Arthur Vance. He was a very wealthy man. He lived in a large house far away in the country. Silver Oak Manor was a famous place with a long history. Elena looked at the letter again. The handwriting was shaky and small. Arthur Vance sounded very nervous. Elena stood up and walked to the window. She looked at the cars and people on the street below. She liked challenges. A famous painting and a nervous, rich man were a big challenge. She went to her computer and searched for information about Silver Oak Manor. The house was beautiful in the photos. It was made of grey stone and had many large windows. It was surrounded by big, old trees. It looked like a small castle. Elena read more about the painting. The Golden Bird. It was a picture of a bright bird in a dark forest. Experts said it was worth millions of dollars. Elena decided to take the job. She called her assistant on the phone. "I am going away for a few days," she said. "I have a new job at Silver Oak Manor. Please cancel my meetings for the weekend." She began to pack her black bag. She took her flashlight, her notebook, and her camera. She also took her best suit because she wanted to look professional. Elena felt a little bit of excitement. She did not know what to expect, but she was ready to work. She drove her small blue car out of the city. The tall buildings changed into green fields. Then, the fields changed into dark woods. The road became narrow and windy. The sky was grey, and it started to rain. Finally, Elena saw a large iron gate. The sign on the gate said, "Silver Oak Manor." She stopped her car and waited. She felt that this job was going to be very interesting. The mystery was just beginning. Elena waited at the iron gate. The rain was heavy now. It hit the roof of her car with a steady rhythm. She looked at her watch. It was 5 o'clock in the evening, but the sky was already dark. Suddenly, a man walked toward the gate from the other side. He wore a long black coat and a wide hat. He looked very cold. The man pulled a heavy lever. The metal gates made a slow, scraping sound as they opened. Elena drove her car through the gate. The man followed her. He walked to the driver's side of her car and signaled for her to stop. Elena rolled down her window. A cold wind entered the car. "Are you Ms. Elena?" the man asked. His voice was low and thin. He did not look at her eyes. Instead, He looked at her hands on the steering wheel. "Yes. I am," Elena replied. "And you are?" "I am Victor," he said. "I am the driver for Mr. Vance. Please, leave your car here. I will drive you the rest of the way in the estate car. The road to the house is very bad because of the storm. Small cars sometimes get stuck in the mud." Elena nodded. She stepped out of her car and felt the wet ground under her boots. The wind was strong. It blew her hair across her face. She grabbed her black bag and moved to a large, dark SUV. Victor opened the door for her. He was a tall man, maybe 40 years old. His face was thin and his skin was very pale. As Victor drove, Elena watched him carefully. His hands were on the steering wheel, but they were not still. They were shaking. He kept looking in the mirror. He looked like he was watching for something in the shadows behind them. The car moved slowly over the rocks and mud. "Is everything okay, Victor?" Elena asked quietly. Victor jumped a little in his seat. He gripped the wheel tighter. "Yes, Ms. Elena. Everything is fine. It is just a very big storm. We do not usually have visitors at this time of year. It makes the house feel different." The road was narrow and surrounded by tall oak trees. The branches looked like long, dark fingers in the wind. The car climbed higher up a hill. Elena could see the lights of the manor now. It was a very large building made of grey stone. It had many chimneys and many windows. Only a few windows had yellow lights inside. "Mr. Vance is waiting for you in the library," Victor said. He spoke quickly. He seemed to want the drive to end. "He is very anxious to see you. He has been talking about your arrival all day." "And the other guests?" Elena asked. "Are they here yet?" "Yes," Victor said. He stopped the car in front of the massive wooden front doors. "Mrs. Sarah and Ms. Martha are inside. They arrived an hour ago. They are waiting for dinner." Victor turned off the engine. The car became very quiet. He did not move for a moment. He just stared at the dark house. Finally, he looked at Elena. For a second, she saw real fear in his eyes. Then, he looked away and opened his door. "We should go inside," he said. Elena followed him to the front door. She felt the cold rain on her neck. She knew Victor was hiding something. Victor opened the heavy front door. It made a deep, scraping sound against the stone floor. Inside, the entrance hall was enormous. The ceiling was very high, and a large chandelier hung from the center. It gave off a soft, yellow light, but the corners of the room remained in shadow. Elena stepped onto a thick red carpet. She felt the warmth of the house, but the air felt heavy and still. A man walked down the wide stone stairs. He was thin and had white hair. He wore a dark blue velvet jacket. This was Arthur Vance. He looked older than his photos. His face was covered in lines, and his hands moved nervously. When he saw Elena, he smiled, but his eyes stayed worried. "Ms. Elena, I am so glad you are here," Arthur said. He reached out and shook her hand. His skin felt like old paper. "Thank you for coming in this terrible weather." "It is my pleasure, Mr. Vance," Elena replied. "You sounded very concerned in your letter." "I am very concerned," Arthur whispered. He looked around the hall as if the walls were listening. "But come. The other guests are in the drawing room. We are about to have some tea." Elena followed Arthur into a large room with a big fireplace. A bright fire burned in the hearth. The wood made a soft snapping noise as it burned. 2 women were already there. One woman sat on a long silk sofa. She looked about 40 years old. She wore a very expensive black dress and many gold rings. Her hair was perfectly styled. This was Sarah. She held a glass of water and looked at Elena with a sharp expression. She did not look friendly. The other woman stood by the large window, watching the rain. She was younger, perhaps 30. She wore a simple brown sweater and grey trousers. Her face was kind, but she looked tired. This was Martha. She turned around and gave Elena a small, shy smile. "Everyone," Arthur said. "This is Elena. She is a specialist. She is here to help us with security." Sarah laughed, but the sound was not happy. "Security? In this old house? We are in the middle of nowhere. Arthur, who is going to come here in a storm? Safety is always important." "Sarah," Martha said quietly. Her voice was gentle. She looked at Elena. "It is nice to meet you, Elena. I am Martha. I am a teacher. And I am Sarah," the woman on the sofa said. "I own a large company in the city. I am a very busy woman. But Arthur invited me for the weekend. I thought it would be a relaxing break. I did not know we needed guards." Elena sat down in a wooden chair. She watched the two women. Sarah was loud and confident. Martha was quiet and observant. Both women seemed uncomfortable, but for different reasons. Elena noticed that Sarah kept looking at her watch. Martha kept looking at Arthur. "I am here to ensure everyone feels safe," Elena said calmly. She looked at Arthur. He was staring at the empty space above the fireplace. He seemed to be in his own world. The room was beautiful and warm, but Elena felt a strange tension. No one was truly relaxing. They were all waiting for something to happen. Arthur stood up from his chair. He looked at the three women. His face was very serious now. "Please, follow me," he said. "I want to show you why I am so worried. I want to show you the reason for your visit." The group left the warm drawing room. They walked down a long, dark hallway. The walls were covered with old photos of people from the past. Elena looked at the photos. Most of the people looked unhappy. The air in the hallway was much colder than in the drawing room. At the end of the hallway, there was a large metal door. Arthur took a heavy bunch of keys from his pocket. He picked a long silver key and put it into the lock. The metal made a dry, scraping sound as the lock opened. He pushed the door, and it moved slowly on its hinges. "This is the private gallery," Arthur whispered. The room was large and rectangular. There were no windows. The walls were painted a deep, dark red. In the middle of the room, there was a single painting. It was not very large, but it was very bright. A special light on the ceiling shone directly onto the picture. "This is the golden bird," Arthur said. He walked closer to the painting. His voice was full of pride and fear. The painting showed a beautiful bird with feathers made of bright gold. It was sitting on a branch in a dark, blue forest. The colors were very strong. The bird looked almost real, as if it could fly away at any moment. The frame was thick and made of heavy gold. "It is beautiful," Martha said. She stepped forward and looked at the colors. "The detail is amazing. It looks like it is glowing." Sarah walked around the painting. She did not look at the bird. She looked at the frame and the wall. "And you say it is worth $5 million?" she asked. Her voice was sharp. "That is a lot of money for a small piece of wood and paint. It is worth much more than that to my family," Arthur replied. He looked at Elena. "Ms. Elena, please look at the security. I have a camera in the corner and an alarm on the wall, but I still do not feel safe. I feel like someone is watching the house." Elena walked to the painting. She did not touch it, but she looked closely at the frame. She saw a thin wire behind the gold wood. Then, she looked up at the camera. A small red light was glowing on the camera. "The camera is on," Elena said. and the alarm is connected to the frame. If someone moves the painting, the alarm will make a very loud noise in every room of the house. Is that enough? Arthur asked. He was rubbing his hands together. It is a good start, Elena said. But technology can fail. I want to check the wires in the security room later. I also want to check the locks on the windows in this hallway. The guests stood in silence for a minute. They all stared at the golden bird. It was a very valuable object, and now it was the center of their attention. Elena felt a strange feeling in her stomach. She knew that where there is a lot of money, there is often a lot of danger. She looked at Sarah and Martha. They were both watching the painting, but their expressions were hard to read. I think we should go back, Arthur said. The storm is getting worse. I can hear the wind against the walls. He locked the metal door again. The sound of the lock echoed in the quiet hallway. They walked back to the main part of the house, but Elena kept thinking about the bright golden bird in the dark room. The group returned to the main hall. Outside, the sky was now completely black. The storm was much stronger than before. Elena stood by a large window and looked out. She could see the tall oak trees moving violently in the wind. The rain was not just falling. It was hitting the glass with a heavy, constant force. It sounded like thousands of small stones hitting the house. Arthur walked to the window next to Elena. He looked very worried. I have not seen a storm like this in many years, he said quietly. He placed a hand on the cold glass. The road from the city is very old. When it rains like this, the dirt turns into deep mud. No car can move on it. Sarah walked over, holding a new glass of water. She looked annoyed. What do you mean, Arthur? I have a very important meeting in the city tomorrow morning. I must leave early. Arthur turned to her. He shook his head slowly. I am sorry, Sarah. But look at the trees. Look at the water on the grass. The bridge at the bottom of the hill is likely underwater now. Nobody can leave Silver Oak Manor tonight. And nobody can come here to help us. The room became very quiet. Martha sat back down on the sofa. She wrapped her arms around herself. So, we are trapped here? She asked. Her voice was small and a little bit shaky. We are stuck in this big house until the rain stops. It is the safest choice, Elena said. She wanted to calm the guests, but she was also thinking about the painting. The storm is dangerous. It is better to stay inside where it is warm and dry. But the power, Martha said, pointing at the chandelier. The lights flickered for a moment. They grew dim and then bright again. What if the lights go out? We have many candles, Arthur said. And Victor is checking the generator in the basement. We will be fine. Elena watched the guests. Sarah looked angry. She was tapping her foot on the rug. Martha looked scared. She was watching the shadows on the walls. Elena knew that being trapped changed people. In a normal house, people feel safe. But in a house with a $5 million painting and a bridge underwater, people feel like they are in a cage. Suddenly, a bright flash of light filled the sky outside. A few seconds later, a massive, deep sound of thunder shook the floor under their feet. The windows rattled in their frames. Martha jumped and moved away from the window. Even Sarah looked a little bit pale. I will go and check on dinner, Arthur said. He seemed happy to have a reason to leave the room. The cook is preparing a nice meal for us. It will help us forget about the weather. When Arthur left, the three women stayed in the room. The only sound was the wind hitting the stone walls and the fire in the fireplace. Elena looked at the doors and the locks. She was not just a guest. She was a professional. She knew that the storm was the perfect cover for a crime. If the painting disappeared tonight, the thief would have nowhere to go. But neither would the police. Elena realized she needed to be very alert. She looked at her notebook. She began to write down the names of everyone in the house. She was trapped with a group of strangers, and the mystery was growing. The dining room was as large as the drawing room. A long wooden table stood in the center. There were many candles on the table because the lights were still flickering. The candle flames moved in the drafty air, creating long shadows on the walls. Arthur sat at the head of the table. Elena sat on his right, and Sarah and Martha sat across from each other. The cook brought out plates of hot soup and fresh bread. The food smelled good, but the atmosphere was not pleasant. Everyone was quiet for a long time. The only sound was the clinking of spoons against the ceramic bowls. Elena decided to start a conversation to learn more about the guests. "Martha, you said you are a teacher," Elena said. "What do you teach?" Martha looked up and smiled. It was a small, tired smile. "I teach art history at a small college," she said. "That is why I love the golden bird. I have studied it in books for many years. Seeing it in person is like a dream for me. It must be wonderful to see your passion in real life," Elena said. She then turned to Sarah. "And you, Sarah?" "Arthur said you own a company." Sarah put her spoon down. She looked bored. "I buy and sell businesses," she said. "It is a very fast life. I like things that are modern and efficient. This house is not that. It is old and full of dust. I am only here because Arthur and I have some old business to finish." Arthur looked at his soup. He did not eat much. "We are friends, Sarah," he said quietly. "Let's not talk about business tonight. We have a guest." Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. "Friends? Is that what you call it? You invited me here because you needed to tell me something important. You have been avoiding me all evening. This is not the time," Arthur said. His voice was a bit louder now. He looked at the door to make sure the cook was not there. "It is exactly the time," Sarah replied. She leaned forward. "The bridge is down. I am stuck here. You owe me an explanation about the investments. My company needs those answers." Arthur's face turned red. He gripped his napkin tightly. "I told you. I will discuss it tomorrow. Tonight, we are hosts. Please, show some respect for Ms. Elena and Martha." Martha looked down at her plate. She looked very uncomfortable. Elena watched the two of them. She noticed that Arthur was not just nervous about the painting. He was afraid of Sarah's questions. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed desperate for money or information. The argument stopped as quickly as it began. They finished the meal in a heavy, cold silence. Arthur stood up. He looked exhausted. "I think it is time for us to rest," he said. "The storm is not stopping. We should go to our rooms and try to sleep." Elena watched them leave the room one by one. She stayed at the table for a moment. She thought about Sarah's anger and Martha's quiet nature. Everyone had a reason to be at Silver Oak Manor, and most of those reasons were hidden. Elena knew she would not sleep well tonight. She had too many questions. Elena went to her bedroom on the second floor. The room was very large and the ceiling was high. There was a big bed with white sheets and a heavy wooden wardrobe. She did not feel like sleeping. She sat on the edge of the bed and kept her boots on. She kept her black bag and her flashlight next to her. Outside, the storm was at its strongest point. The wind made a low, whistling sound as it passed through the gaps in the window frames. The rain continued to hit the stone walls. It was a constant, heavy rhythm. Elena looked at the lamp on her bedside table. The light was weak and yellow. It flickered twice, then stayed bright for a minute. Suddenly, the house became completely silent and dark. The lamp went out. The small heater in the corner stopped working. There was no light from the hallway under the door. Elena sat perfectly still in the black room. She waited for her eyes to adjust to the darkness, but there was no moon or stars outside to provide light. In the silence, she heard a sound. It was coming from the hallway outside her room. It was the sound of a very heavy object hitting the floor. It was a single, deep noise that felt like a vibration in the wood beneath her feet. A few seconds later, she heard the quick sound of footsteps running away. Elena grabbed her metal flashlight. She turned it on. A strong beam of white light cut through the darkness of her room. She walked to the door and turned the handle slowly. She opened the door and moved her light across the long hallway. The hallway was empty. The air was cold now because the heating system was off. Elena walked toward the stairs. She saw a shape on the floor. It was a large, heavy vase. It was made of blue and white ceramic. It lay in many small pieces on the carpet. Someone had knocked it over. "Hello!" Elena called out. Her voice sounded loud in the quiet house. "Is anyone there?" A door opened at the end of the hall. Martha stepped out. She was holding a small candle. The yellow flame moved back and forth. Her face looked very pale in the candlelight. She looked terrified. "Elena, what happened?" Martha asked. Her voice was shaking. "I heard a loud noise. I'm so scared of the dark." Before Elena could answer, another door opened. Sarah appeared. She did not have a light. She looked angry and confused. "Why are the lights off? Where is Arthur? This is a disaster. The power is out," Elena said calmly. She moved her flashlight beam to the broken vase. And someone was moving in the hallway. They broke this vase. Was it the thief? Martha whispered. She moved closer to Elena. "I don't know yet," Elena replied. "But we need to check on the gallery. We need to check on the painting." Suddenly, they heard a voice from downstairs. It was Arthur. He was shouting, but they could not understand his words. He sounded very upset. Elena did not wait for the other women. She ran toward the stairs, her flashlight pointing the way down into the dark heart of the manor. Elena ran down the stairs. The light from her flashlight danced on the dark walls. She reached the bottom of the stairs and saw Arthur. He was standing near the entrance to the gallery. He was holding his chest with one hand and breathing very hard. His face was white, and he looked like he was about to fall. "Arthur, what is wrong?" Elena asked. She shone her light on his face. "The door," Arthur cried. He pointed at the gallery. "I heard a noise. I came out of my room and saw the door to the gallery was open." Suddenly, the lights flickered. A low humming sound started from somewhere in the basement. The chandelier in the hall became bright again. The power was back. The yellow light was a relief, but the fear in the room did not go away. Elena turned off her flashlight. Sarah and Martha came down the stairs. They looked at Arthur and Elena. Sarah looked impatient and held her silk robe tightly. Martha looked like she wanted to cry. She was still holding her small candle. "The lights are on," Sarah said. "Now, what was that loud noise earlier?" "The gallery," Elena said. She looked at the heavy metal door at the end of the hall. It was not locked anymore. It was slightly open. They walked into the gallery together. The room was bright now. The red walls looked even darker under the electric lights. They all looked at the center of the wall where the treasure was kept. The group stopped. Nobody spoke for a long time. The spot where the golden bird usually hung was different now. The beautiful painting was not there. The gold bird and the blue forest were gone. Only the heavy gold frame remained on the wall. The middle of the frame was empty and dark. Arthur made a soft, sad sound. He walked to the wall and touched the cold metal of the frame. "It is gone," he whispered. "My father's painting. It is really gone." Elena moved closer. She did not touch anything. She looked at the edges of the frame. The canvas was not removed carefully. It looked like someone had used a very sharp knife to cut the picture out of the frame. There were small pieces of white thread on the floor. The alarm, Elena said. Why did the alarm not make a sound? She looked at the corner of the room. The security camera was still there, but the small red light was off. She looked at the alarm box on the wall near the door. The wires were hanging out. Someone had cut them during the darkness. This was not an accident, Elena said to the group. Her voice was firm and professional. Someone in this house knew exactly where the wires were. Someone knew how to move in the dark. Sarah crossed her arms. She looked at Martha, then at Arthur. Well, do not look at me. I was in my room. I do not know anything about wires or tools. Martha was staring at the floor. The painting is so famous, she said. Where will the thief take it? The bridge is broken. No one can leave. That is the point, Elena said. She looked at each of them carefully. The thief is still here. The painting is still in this house. And we are going to find it. Arthur looked at Elena. He looked old and very tired. Please, Elena, find it. It is the most important thing I own. Elena nodded. She felt the weight of the mystery. The house was locked. The storm was outside. The thief was standing in the room with her. Elena looked at the empty gold frame one last time. Her mind was working very fast. She was not just a guest anymore. She was a detective. Wait here, she said to the others. Her voice was strong and calm. Do not touch anything in this room. I need to check the exits of the house. She walked back to the main hall. Arthur, Sarah, and Martha followed her closely. They did not want to be alone in the gallery. Elena went to the large front door. She looked at the heavy iron bolts. They were still pushed into the stone wall. The metal felt cold and solid under her fingers. The front door is locked from the inside, Elena said. She looked at the floor. There was no mud and no water near the entrance. Nobody entered or left through this door. Next, she walked through the dining room to the kitchen. The kitchen was large and dark. It still smelled like the soup from dinner. There was a small wooden door at the back for deliveries. Elena checked the handle and the lock. It was closed tightly. She moved her flashlight over the floor. She saw a very small puddle of water, but the door was definitely shut. The back door is also locked, she noted in her notebook. Elena then walked to the library. She moved the heavy velvet curtains and looked at the large windows. She checked every window on the first floor. Every piece of glass was whole. The storm was still hitting the house with great force, but the windows were all closed and locked. There was no broken glass and no sign of a struggle. I have checked all the main exits on this floor, Elena told the group. They were all standing in the hallway now. The yellow light from the chandelier made them look tired and pale. They looked at each other with suspicion. The storm is too strong for anyone to be outside. The bridge is gone. The doors are all locked from the inside. There is no sign of a break-in from the outside. What does that mean? Martha asked. She was rubbing her arms because she was cold. Her voice was a small whisper. Elena looked at Sarah, then at Martha, and finally at Arthur. It means the thief did not come from the forest, she said. The person who took the painting is in this house right now. The painting is still here, hidden in one of these rooms. Sarah let out a sharp, angry breath. Are you saying one of us is a criminal? That is a very serious thing to say. Elena, we are Arthur's guests. I am a professional, Elena replied. I look at the facts. The alarm wires were cut by someone who knew where they were. The doors are all locked. These are the facts. "Where is Victor?" Arthur asked suddenly. He looked around the hall. He looked confused. "The driver." He went to the basement to check the generator before the lights came back on. "Why is he not here with us?" Elena realized Arthur was right. Victor was missing. He was the tall, thin man who was very nervous earlier. He knew the house very well. "I will find him," Elena said. She looked at the group. "But for now, nobody goes anywhere alone. We must stay together. There is no way out of this house, and there is no way for the thief to escape." The manor felt smaller now. It was not a beautiful home anymore. It was a box with a secret inside. Elena felt the eyes of the guests on her. She knew that the next few hours would be very difficult. Elena looked at the three adults. Their faces were full of fear and doubt. She needed to control the situation. If everyone moved around the house, the thief could hide the painting in a new place. She needed them in one room where she could see them. "Listen to me," Elena said. Her voice was calm but very firm. "The painting is gone, but the thief is trapped. I need to look for clues in the gallery. I want all of you to go to the living room. Sit together. Do not leave that room until I come back." Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but she saw the serious look in Elena's eyes. She turned and walked toward the living room. Martha followed her quickly, her hands still shaking. Arthur looked at the empty frame one last time. He sighed a long, heavy sigh and followed the women. Elena was now alone in the gallery. She closed the door. She wanted to hear the silence. The room was bright, but it felt cold. She walked to the center of the room and stood where the painting used to be. She looked at the floor first. She did not want to step on any evidence. She walked slowly toward the wall. She looked at the gold frame. It was still hanging on the wall, but it was very light now without the canvas. She looked at the edges of the frame. The thief did not take the whole thing. They used a very sharp knife to cut the picture out. The cuts were very straight. "This person has steady hands," Elena thought. They were not in a total panic. She looked at the wires on the wall. They were the wires for the alarm. They were cut with a tool, like a pair of strong scissors. The cut was clean. Elena looked at the security camera in the corner. She stood on a chair to look at it closely. The lens was covered with a small piece of black tape. That is why the camera saw nothing. They knew exactly where the camera was. Elena whispered to herself. She got down from the chair and looked at the carpet under the frame. The carpet was dark red. She knelt down and moved her flashlight very close to the floor. She saw something small. It was not a piece of the painting. It was a very thin piece of string. Elena took a small plastic bag from her pocket. She picked up the string. It was a blue thread. It was about 2 centimeters long. It was the same color as a dark blue suit or a sweater. She held the bag up to the light. The thread was clean and new. She looked around the rest of the room. There were no footprints because the carpet was very thick. There were no fingerprints on the frame because the thief probably wore gloves. But the blue thread was a start. Elena felt a cold breeze. She looked up. There was a small air vent near the ceiling. It was too small for a person, but it was open. She realized the house had many secrets. She put the plastic bag in her pocket and walked toward the door. It was time to talk to the guests again. She wanted to see who was wearing blue. Elena walked into the living room. The guests were sitting in silence. Arthur sat in a large chair near the fire. Sarah sat on the sofa with her arms crossed. Martha sat in a corner, looking at her hands. The room was warm, but the people inside were cold and distant. Elena looked at each of them. She was looking for one specific color. She reached into her pocket and felt the small plastic bag. The blue thread was safe inside. She remembered the color perfectly. It was a dark, Rich blue. She looked at Sarah. Sarah wore a black silk dress. There was no blue on her. She looked at Martha. Martha wore a simple brown sweater. It was old and soft, but it was definitely not blue. Then, Elena looked at Arthur. He was wearing a dark blue velvet jacket. The color matched the thread in her pocket. Elena felt a sharp spark of suspicion. Arthur was the owner of the house. Why would he steal his own painting? She remembered what she found in the gallery. The wires were cut with care. The camera was covered with tape. It was someone who knew the house perfectly. "Did you find anything, Miss Elena?" Arthur asked. He looked up at her. His eyes were red, as if he had been crying. "I found a small clue," Elena said. She did not show the thread yet. She wanted to watch their reactions. "I found something that tells me the thief was wearing specific clothes." Arthur touched the sleeve of his blue jacket. He looked down at his clothes and then back at Elena. "Everyone has many clothes, Elena. A piece of fabric does not prove a crime. I did not say what I found, Arthur," Elena said quietly. Sarah stood up. She looked frustrated. "This is a waste of time. We are sitting here like prisoners while a thief is running around the house. What about Victor? You said he was missing. Maybe he is the one wearing the blue clothes." "Victor wore a black coat when I arrived," Elena said. "But he might have other clothes under his coat. We still need to find him." "Arthur, does Victor have a room in the main house?" "No," Arthur replied. "He lives in a small room above the garage. But the garage is across the garden. In this storm, it is very difficult to get there. He was in the basement earlier," Martha reminded them. Her voice was thin. "He went to check the generator. Maybe he is still down there. Maybe he is hurt." Elena looked at the door leading to the basement. It was a heavy wooden door near the kitchen. If the blue thread did not come from Arthur's jacket, maybe it came from Victor. Or maybe someone else was hiding in the house. "I am going to the basement," Elena announced. "Arthur, I need you to stay here with Sarah and Martha. Do not let anyone leave this room. It is for your safety." She turned and walked toward the kitchen. She felt the weight of the blue thread in her pocket. It was a tiny piece of evidence, but it was a beginning. The mystery of Silver Oak Manor was getting deeper, and the basement was a dark place to look for answers. Elena was near the kitchen door when she heard a loud voice. It was Sarah. Elena stopped and listened. She did not want to leave the room while the guests were fighting. She walked back into the living room. Sarah was standing in front of Martha. Her face was red and her hands were on her hips. "You are very quiet, Martha," Sarah said. Her voice was sharp and mean. "You are too quiet. Why are you not angry? $1 million painting is gone, and you just sit there like a statue." Martha looked up. Her eyes were wide. She looked like she wanted to run away. "I am just shocked, Sarah," Martha said softly. "I am not a loud person. I am sad about the painting because it is a piece of history. I do not need to shout to show my feelings." "I don't believe you," Sarah replied. She stepped closer to the smaller woman. "You said you are an art teacher. You know everything about the golden bird. You told us you have studied it for years. Maybe you wanted it for yourself. Maybe you think it belongs in a museum and not in Arthur's house." Martha shook her head quickly. "That is not true. I love art, but I am not a thief. I am a professional." "Professional?" Sarah laughed. The sound was cold. "You are a teacher at a small college. You probably do not earn much money. That painting could buy you a new life. It could buy you a house and a car. It could pay for everything you ever wanted." Arthur stood up from his chair. "Sarah, Please stop. This is not helping. Martha is my guest. She is a suspect. Arthur. Sarah shouted. She turned to look at Elena. Elena, look at her. She knows the history of the house. She arrived early today. She had time to look at the security wires. And look at her bag. It is large enough to hide a canvas. Elena looked at Martha's brown bag on the floor. It was a simple bag made of cloth. Then she looked back at Sarah. Everyone is a suspect right now. Sarah. Elena said. Including you. Sarah's mouth opened in surprise. Me. I am a wealthy woman. Why would I steal a painting? I have more money than all of you. Money is not the only reason people steal. Elena said calmly. Sometimes people steal because they have debts. Sometimes they steal for the thrill. And sometimes they steal to hurt someone else. The room became very still. The fire made a low, crackling sound. Sarah sat back down on the sofa. She looked away from Elena and Martha. Martha looked at the floor. She looked very hurt by Sarah's words. We must stay calm. Elena said. If we fight, the thief wins. I'm going to the basement now. Arthur, please make sure everyone stays here. Elena left the room. She could still feel the anger in the air. Sarah was right about one thing. Martha did know a lot about the painting. But Sarah was also very aggressive. Was she trying to hide her own guilt by blaming someone else? Elena needed to find Victor. He was the only person who was not in the room. Elena put her hand on the cold metal handle of the basement door. Before she could turn it, she heard a soft, weak groan coming from the living room. It was not a loud cry, but it sounded full of pain. Elena stopped. She knew that sound. It was the sound of someone who could not breathe well. She turned around and ran back into the room. Arthur was leaning against the heavy wooden mantel of the fireplace. His face was no longer red from the argument. It was a pale, sickly grey. Small drops of sweat stood out on his forehead. He gripped the edge of the wood so hard that his knuckles were white. His breathing was fast and shallow. Arthur! Martha cried. She ran to his side and tried to hold his arm. What is happening? Are you okay? Arthur did not answer immediately. He closed his eyes and moved his head slowly from side to side. My chest, he whispered. His voice was so thin it was hard to hear. It feels tight. Like a heavy stone is sitting on me. Sarah stayed on the sofa, but she looked worried now. Her anger was gone, replaced by a look of confusion. Is it a heart attack? She asked. We need to call a doctor. The phone lines are down. Sarah. Elena said. She walked quickly to Arthur and felt his pulse. His heart was beating very fast and irregularly. The storm has cut us off from the world. We cannot call anyone. Elena helped Arthur sit down in his large armchair. He sank into the soft leather and let out a long, shaky breath. It is the stress, Arthur said. He looked at the empty space on the wall where the painting used to be. The golden bird was my life. Losing it. It is too much for my old heart. You must rest, Elena said firmly. She looked at Martha. Is there medicine? Does he have a doctor's prescription? Yes, Martha said. He keeps his pills in his bedroom. They are in the drawer next to his bed. Arthur nodded weakly. I need to lie down. I cannot think. I cannot breathe in this room anymore. The shadows are too long. Elena and Martha helped Arthur stand up. He was a tall man, but he felt very light and frail now. They walked him slowly out of the living room and toward the stairs. Sarah followed them with her eyes, but she did not move from the sofa. She looked like she was thinking about something else. They reached Arthur's bedroom on the second floor. It was a dark room with heavy curtains. Elena checked the room quickly. It was empty. No one was hiding behind the curtains or under the bed. They helped Arthur lie down on the large bed. Martha found the small plastic bottle of pills and gave him one with a glass of water. "I will stay here for a moment," Martha whispered to Elena. "I will make sure he falls asleep." Arthur looked at Elena. His eyes were tired. "Elena," he said, "the house is yours now. You are in charge. Find my painting. Please. It is the only thing I have left of my father." Elena nodded. "Rest now, Arthur. I will find it." She walked out of the room and closed the door softly. She stood in the dark hallway for a second. The house felt different now. The owner was sick, the driver was missing, and two women were full of secrets. Elena was the only one left to find the truth. She turned and walked back toward the stairs. It was time to go to the basement. Elena walked down the kitchen hall. She felt the heavy metal of her flashlight in her hand. She opened the door to the basement. The stairs were narrow and steep. She walked down slowly. The air changed immediately. It was no longer warm like the living room. It was damp and cold. Each step she took made a small, sharp noise on the old wood. "Victor," Elena said. She did not shout. She wanted to hear if someone was moving in the shadows. There was no answer. She only heard the low, steady hum of the generator in the corner. The white beam of her flashlight hit the grey stone walls. She saw rows of old wine bottles and many dusty wooden boxes. She walked deeper into the basement. She reached a small room at the very back. This room was different from the rest of the basement. It had a wooden floor instead of stone. Against the far wall stood a large, tall bookshelf. The shelf was filled with heavy books. Their covers were grey with thick dust. Elena stopped. This was very strange. Why was there a library in a damp basement? The moisture in the air would ruin the paper over time. She moved her light to the floor. She saw something very interesting. There were two curved marks on the wooden floor. These marks were made by something heavy moving back and forth many times. She looked at the bookshelf again. She realized it was not just a piece of furniture. It was a door. Elena began to examine the books carefully. She touched the spines of the old volumes. She pushed some and pulled others. Finally, she found a book that felt different. It was a thick book with a dark red cover. It did not move left or right like the others. She gripped the top of the book and pulled it toward her. She heard a small, sharp mechanical noise from behind the wall. The bookshelf began to move. It swung away from the stone wall very slowly. Behind the shelf, there was a dark, square opening. It was a secret doorway hidden from the rest of the house. Elena held her breath. A very cold wind came out of the dark hole. It smelled like old earth and smoke. She pointed her flashlight into the opening. She saw a narrow stone passage. The walls were wet, and the ceiling was low. The passage went deep into the ground, leading away from the main house and toward the gardens. "Where does this go?" she whispered to herself. She thought about Victor, the nervous driver. Maybe he did not go to the generator at all. Maybe he went into the wall. Elena took a deep breath and stepped into the dark tunnel. She was no longer just in an old manor. She was in a labyrinth of secrets. Elena walked into the dark tunnel. The air was very different here. It was thin and smelled of old, wet stone. She held her flashlight in front of her. The beam of light showed rough walls made of grey rock. The ceiling was low. Elena had to bend her head a little to walk comfortably. The ground was made of dirt and small, flat stones. It was very quiet. She could only hear her own breathing and the soft noise of her boots on the ground. She looked at the floor carefully. The dirt was dry in some places. She saw marks in the dust. They were footprints. Someone had walked here recently. The footprints were large. They looked like the shape of a man's shoe. Elena followed the marks. She felt a little bit of fear, but she was also very curious. This tunnel was a secret. Why did Arthur have a secret tunnel under his house? After walking for a few minutes, the tunnel became wider. It opened into a small, square room. This room was also made of stone. There was a small wooden table and 2 old chairs in the center. On the table, there was a glass bottle and a piece of bread. The bread was hard and dry. Someone had been here, but perhaps not today. Elena moved her flashlight around the small room. She saw a wooden chest in the corner. The chest was closed. She walked over to it and knelt down on the cold floor. The wood felt damp. She tried to open the lid. It was heavy, but it was not locked. She lifted the lid slowly. Inside the chest, there was a black coat. Elena picked it up. It was heavy and it felt wet. She remembered the driver. Victor. He wore a black coat when she arrived at the manor. She looked at the coat carefully. There was fresh mud on the bottom of it. This was definitely Victor's coat. Why was it here in a secret room instead of in his own house? Under the coat, Elena found something else. It was a metal box. It was small and grey. She opened the box. Inside, there was a pair of silver scissors and a roll of black tape. Elena's heart beat faster. She remembered the gallery. The alarm wires were cut with a sharp tool. The camera was covered with black tape. "The tools are here," she said quietly to herself. She looked at the scissors. They were very sharp. The black tape was the same kind she saw on the camera lens. This room was the thief's hiding place. But the painting was not here. The chest was otherwise empty. Elena stood up. She felt a cold breeze again. She looked at the other side of the small room. There was another opening in the wall. The tunnel continued into the darkness. She did not know where it went, but she knew she had to follow it. She put the metal box in her bag. She left the black coat in the chest. She stepped back into the dark passage. The mystery was becoming a real danger. Victor's coat was here, but where was Victor? And why did he leave his tools behind? Elena moved forward, deeper into the earth under the manor. Elena continued to walk down the narrow stone passage. The air was colder now. She could feel the dampness on the walls. The silence of the tunnel was deep. She only heard the soft sound of water falling from the ceiling. The water hit the floor with a rhythmic, quiet splash. Elena kept her flashlight low to see the ground. She reached a section where the stone changed to old, dark brick. In the wall, she noticed a small space. It was like a tiny cupboard without a door. Inside this space sat a small wooden box. It was covered in a layer of grey dust. Elena reached in and pulled it out. The wood felt rough under her fingers. She sat on her heels and placed the box on the dirt floor. She opened the lid slowly. The hinges made a dry, scraping sound. Inside the box, she found a single piece of folded paper. The paper was thick and yellow with age. Elena unfolded it with great care. It was a map of Silver Oak Manor. The map was very detailed. It showed every room, every hallway, and every staircase. Elena's eyes moved across the drawing. She saw the drawing of the gallery. Around the gallery, there was a large circle drawn with a bright red pen. There were other red marks too. One was in the basement, right where the security wires were located. Another was near the small back door in the kitchen. This is not just a map, Elena thought. This is a plan for a robbery. She moved her flashlight closer to the paper. At the bottom of the map, there were several sentences written in a quick, messy hand. The words were simple but clear. One note said, "Wait for the storm." Another said, Cut the power at the main box. A third note was the most chilling. The bird is the key to everything. Elena felt her heart beat faster. The bird was clearly the painting. The notes explained exactly what had happened tonight. The thief knew about the storm. They knew about the power. They had studied the house until they knew every secret. She looked at the handwriting. It was not the shaky, elegant writing of Arthur Vance. It was more modern and hurried. It looked like the writing of someone who was in a rush. She thought about Sarah's expensive pens and Martha's teacher's notebooks. She thought about Victor's nervous hands. A sudden noise came from the darkness ahead. It was the sound of a heavy door opening and then closing. The sound echoed through the tunnel like a low groan. Elena immediately pressed the button on her flashlight. The world became black. She stood up slowly and pressed her back against the cold brick wall. She held her breath. She did not move a muscle. In the darkness, she heard the sound of footsteps. They were slow and heavy. Someone was walking toward her from the other end of the tunnel. Elena reached into her bag and touched the metal box she had found earlier. She was trapped in the dark, and the thief was coming closer. Elena stayed in the dark. She did not move. The footsteps in the tunnel were heavy and slow. The person walked past her. They did not have a light, and they did not see her. Elena waited for a long time until the tunnel was quiet again. Her heart was beating very fast. She turned her flashlight back on. She decided to go back to the main house immediately. She needed to see who was in the living room. She walked quickly back through the tunnel. She reached the secret bookshelf and pushed the red book. The door opened with a small noise. Elena stepped into the cold basement and ran up the stairs to the kitchen. She went straight to the living room. The fire in the fireplace was very low. Sarah was sitting on the sofa. She was looking at her fingernails. She looked bored and a little bit angry. Martha was standing by the large window. She was watching the rain hit the glass. Both women looked up when Elena entered the room. "Where is Mr. Vance?" Elena asked. She was breathing hard from the stairs. "He is still in his bedroom," Martha said. She walked away from the window. "He is resting. I went to check on him 10 minutes ago. He was asleep." "And Victor?" Elena asked. She looked at Sarah. "Did the driver come here while I was away?" Sarah shook her head. "No. We have not seen Victor since dinner. I thought he was with you or in the basement." Elena felt the cold map in her pocket. "He is not in the basement. I searched the whole area. I even found a secret passage." Martha's eyes went wide. "A secret passage? In this house?" "Yes," Elena said. "And I heard someone walking in it. If it was not one of you, it must be Victor. Or perhaps a stranger." "A stranger?" Sarah laughed. "In this storm? That is impossible. No one can get to this house right now. The bridge is gone. The woods are a wall of water." Elena looked at the empty chairs. "I need to be sure. I'm going to check the garage. Victor lives in a room above it. If he is not there, then he is officially missing." "You are going outside?" Martha asked. "The wind is very dangerous. You can hear the trees breaking." "I have to go," Elena replied. She went to the hallway and put on her long, heavy coat. She opened the front door. A blast of cold, wet air hit her. The rain was like a thick curtain. She stepped out onto the grass. The ground was very soft and slippery. The mud covered her boots instantly. She walked toward the dark shape of the garage. She reached the garage door and tried the handle. It was locked. She moved to the side of the building and looked up at the window of the small room above. There was no light. She walked to the back and found a small wooden ladder. She climbed it carefully. The wind tried to push her off. She reached the door to Victor's room and knocked loudly. "Victor! It is Elena. Open the door." There was no answer. The only sound was the heavy rain on the roof. Elena pushed the door. It was not locked. She stepped inside and turned on her flashlight. The room was very small. There was a bed, a chair, and a small table. The bed was neat. The chair was empty. Victor was not there. His boots were gone. His small bag was gone. Elena looked around the room. She saw a small piece of paper on the table. She picked it up. It was a note. It said, "I cannot stay here anymore. I am sorry." Victor was gone. Elena realized the situation was even worse than she thought. One of the suspects was missing, and he had a head start in the dark. Elena stepped out of the small room above the garage. The wind was even stronger now. It felt like a cold hand pushing against her chest. She held the small note tightly in her hand before putting it in her pocket. Victor was gone, but his room was neat. Why did he leave a note? Where could he go in a storm like this? She climbed down the wooden ladder with care. Her boots slipped once on the wet wood, but she held on tight. When her feet hit the ground, she was in deep, cold mud. She used her flashlight to look at the ground around the garage. The rain was washing away many marks, but she saw something. There were deep lines in the mud. They looked like someone was dragging something heavy. The lines started at the garage door and went toward the garden. Elena followed the lines. She moved slowly. The trees around the path were tall and dark. Their branches moved in the wind and looked like giant arms. "Victor!" She called out. The wind carried her voice away. She walked past a row of stone statues. The statues looked like people watching her in the dark. The garden was very large. It had many paths and small walls. Elena reached a place where the path became narrow. The grass here was long and very wet. She moved her flashlight beam across the green grass. She saw a dark shape near a stone fountain. The shape was not a statue. It was a person. The person was wearing a dark coat and dark trousers. Elena ran toward the shape. She forgot about the mud and the cold rain. She reached the fountain and knelt down. It was Victor. He was lying on his side on the wet grass. His face was pale, almost the color of the stone fountain. His eyes were closed. "Victor, can you hear me?" Elena asked. She touched his shoulder. He did not move. She felt for his pulse on his neck. His skin was very cold, but his heart was still beating. It was slow, but it was there. She looked at his head. There was a small amount of blood on his forehead. It looked like he had fallen and hit his head on the edge of the stone fountain. Elena looked around him. She was looking for the painting. If Victor was the thief, he should have the canvas with him. She searched the grass near his body. She looked inside the stone fountain. There was only rainwater and old leaves. The painting was not there. She looked at Victor's hands. He was wearing dark gloves. They were covered in mud. Elena remembered the note in his room. "I cannot stay here anymore." Did he try to run away because he was scared? Or was he running away with the treasure? "I need to get him inside," Elena said to herself. She could not carry him alone. He was a tall man and very heavy. She stood up and looked back at the manor. The lights in the windows looked small and far away. She had to go back and get help from Sarah and Martha. She took one last look at Victor. He looked very small and weak lying in the giant garden. Elena turned and began to run back toward the house. The mystery was changing. Now, a man was hurt, and the painting was still missing. Elena burst through the heavy front doors of the manor. She was breathless. Her face was wet with rain, and her boots left long trails of dark mud on the red carpet. Sarah and Martha were still in the living room. They jumped when they saw her. Sarah looked shocked to see Elena in such a mess. What happened? Martha cried. She ran toward Elena with a white towel. You are freezing. It is Victor, Elena said. She pushed her wet hair away from her eyes. He is lying near the fountain in the garden. He is hurt. He hit his head, and he is unconscious. I need your help to bring him inside. Sarah frowned. She did not move from the sofa. In this storm, we cannot go out there. We will get sick, or the wind will knock us down. He is a human being. Sarah. Martha shouted. Her voice was surprisingly strong. He is out there in the cold rain. We must help him. Sarah looked at Elena's serious face. She sighed and stood up. Fine. But I am not wearing my good shoes. The three women went to the kitchen. Elena found 3 long raincoats. They put them on and stepped out into the night. The wind was a loud, constant roar. It was difficult to walk in a straight line. Elena led them down the garden path. The flashlight beam moved back and forth as they walked through the deep mud. When they reached the fountain, Martha made a small sound of pity. Victor looked very small on the wet grass. Elena took his shoulders. Martha took his feet. Sarah helped by holding his middle. It was very difficult. Victor was a tall man, and his wet clothes made him even heavier. They moved slowly, inch by inch, back toward the house. Their breathing was loud in the quiet moments between the wind. Finally, they reached the manor and pulled him inside the warm hallway. They closed the door, and the sound of the storm became quiet again. They were all exhausted. They carried Victor into the living room and placed him on the large sofa. Martha ran to the kitchen and returned with warm water and more towels. Elena watched Martha. The teacher was very gentle. She washed the mud and blood from Victor's forehead. Victor moved his head a little bit and made a low groan, but he did not open his eyes. He was still in a very deep sleep. Is he going to be okay? Martha asked. She looked at Elena with worried eyes. I hope so, Elena replied. He has a large bump on his head, but his pulse is getting stronger. He needs to stay warm. Elena looked at Victor's wet clothes. She needed to check his pockets again, but she did not want the women to see. She waited until Sarah went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. Then, she reached into Victor's heavy coat pocket. Her fingers touched something cold and hard. It was not a painting. It was a metal object. She pulled it out slowly. It was a heavy silver key. It was old and had a strange shape. It did not look like a normal door key. It looked like a key for a special box or a desk. Elena hid the key in her own pocket. What are you doing? Sarah asked. She was standing in the doorway, watching Elena. Her eyes were sharp and suspicious. Elena did not move her hand from her pocket. She looked directly at Sarah. Her face was calm and professional. I am checking his pockets for medicine or identification, Elena said. Her voice was steady. He is very cold and he hit his head. I need to know if he has any medical problems. Sarah walked into the room. She stood near the sofa and looked down at Victor. And did you find anything? She asked. Her voice was full of doubt. Did you find a bottle of pills? Or perhaps a small piece of a golden painting? I found nothing for his health, Elena replied. She did not mention the silver key. She did not trust Sarah yet. He has no wallet and no phone. It is very strange for a man to leave his house with nothing. Martha came back into the room with a warm wool blanket. She walked to the sofa and covered Victor. She tucked the blanket around his shoulders. His breathing is better now, Martha said. He is starting to get warm. We should let him rest. He cannot rest for too long. Elena said. "He is the only person who was outside. He might know who took the painting. Or he might be the one who took it." Elena walked away from the sofa. She went to the far corner of the room, near a small lamp. She slowly pulled the silver key out of her pocket. She held it under the light. The key was about 10 centimeters long. It was made of a heavy, dull silver metal. The top of the key was shaped like a small bird. The bird again, Elena thought. Everything in this house was connected to birds. The key was very old. It had a strange, complicated shape at the end. It was not a key for a normal bedroom door or the front gate. It looked like a key for a very old chest or a heavy wooden desk. Elena remembered the library and Arthur's office upstairs. She wondered if this key opened a secret place where the painting was hidden. Suddenly, Victor moved on the sofa. He made a low, dry sound in his throat. His eyes opened a very small amount. He looked at the ceiling and then at the three women. He looked very confused. He tried to sit up, but he groaned and put his hand to his head. "Stay still, Victor," Martha said gently. She put a hand on his arm. "You had a bad fall in the garden. You are safe now. You are inside the manor." Victor looked at Martha. Then he looked at Elena. His eyes became wide with fear. He looked like he wanted to say something, but he could not find the words. He pointed a shaking finger toward the window. The shadow," Victor whispered. His voice was very weak. "In the trees. It was not a dream." "What shadow, Victor?" Elena asked. She moved closer to him. "Who did you see in the garden?" Victor shook his head slowly. The movement made him feel sick, and he closed his eyes again. "Too fast," he whispered. The shadow was too fast. He fell back into a deep sleep. Elena looked at the other women. Martha looked terrified. Sarah looked like she was thinking very hard. Elena felt the weight of the silver key in her hand. She knew she had to find out what it opened. If there was a shadow in the garden, the mystery was bigger than one missing painting. Elena left the living room quietly. Sarah and Martha were busy with Victor and the blankets. They did not see her leave. The hallway was dark and the air was cold. She walked up the stairs to the second floor. She knew where Arthur's office was. It was at the end of the long hallway, far away from the bedrooms. The office door was made of dark, heavy wood. Elena turned the handle. It was not locked. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She turned on her flashlight. The room was full of books and old papers. There was a large wooden desk in the center of the room. It was an expensive desk with many drawers and gold handles. Elena walked to the desk. She looked at the silver key in her hand. The key was small, but it felt heavy. She looked for a keyhole on the desk. She checked the top drawers first. They were all open. They were full of pens, stamps, and white paper. She looked at the bottom of the desk. There was one small drawer near the floor. This drawer was different. It did not have a gold handle. It only had a small, silver keyhole. Elena knelt on the carpet. She put the silver key into the hole. It was a perfect fit. She turned the key slowly. She heard the metal parts of the lock move together. She pulled the drawer open. At first, the drawer looked empty. It was made of dark wood and had a velvet bottom. But Elena was a professional. She knew that rich people often had secret places for their most important things. She took a small knife from her bag and pushed it into the corner of the drawer. A small piece of wood moved. It was a hidden compartment. Elena lifted the wood and saw a thick white envelope. There was no name on the envelope. She opened it and pulled out a letter. The paper was expensive, just like the invitation she received in the city. She began to read the letter. It was a letter to Arthur Vance from a bank. The words were simple, but the meaning was clear. Arthur had no more money. The bank was going to take Silver Oak Manor in 2 weeks. He owed millions of dollars. Arthur is poor, Elena whispered to herself. She looked further into the hidden compartment. Under the letter, there was a photo. It was a photo of a woman. The woman was Sarah. She looked younger in the photo, and she was standing next to Arthur. They both looked very happy. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "The debt must be paid." Elena felt a chill that was not from the storm. Arthur was losing his home. Sarah was connected to his past and his debts. And now, the most valuable painting in the house was missing. Was the theft a way to get insurance money? Or was Sarah taking what she thought was hers? Elena put the letter and the photo into her pocket. She locked the drawer and took the silver key. She needed to speak to Arthur, but she also needed to watch Sarah more closely. The mystery was no longer just about a painting. It was about the secrets of a dying estate. Elena stood in the middle of Arthur's dark office. The flashlight in her hand was the only light in the room. She held the photo of Sarah and the bank letter about Arthur's poverty. But there was more. She reached into the secret compartment one more time. Her fingers touched a piece of blue paper. It was a different kind of document. She pulled it out and read it carefully. This was not a letter from a bank. It was a private contract. The names on the paper were Sarah Miller and a man named Mr. Thorne. Elena knew that name. Mr. Thorne was a person who lent money to people in trouble. But he was a very dangerous man. He was not a bank. He was a criminal. The contract said that Sarah owed Mr. Thorne $2 million. The date on the paper was very recent. Sarah had only 1 month to pay the money back. If she did not pay, Mr. Thorne would take everything she owned. So, Sarah is not a successful business owner. Elena thought. She is in a lot of danger. She needs $2 million, and she needs it fast. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. The golden bird was worth $5 million. If Sarah stole the painting, she could pay her debt and have money left over. This was a very strong reason to commit a crime. Sarah was not here for a relaxing weekend. She was here because she was desperate. Suddenly, Elena heard a noise. It was the sound of a floorboard moving in the hallway outside the office. The sound was very soft, but Elena had sharp ears. She immediately turned off her flashlight. The room became completely black. She stood behind the heavy office door and waited. The door handle turned slowly. There was no light in the hallway, so the person entering the room was also in the darkness. Elena held her breath. She could hear the person's soft breathing. The person walked toward the desk. They did not use a flashlight. They seemed to know the room very well even in the dark. Elena watched the shadow of the person. They reached for the desk drawers. They were looking for something. Elena realized this was her chance to catch the thief. But she also knew she had to be careful. If this person was working for Mr. Thorne, they might be dangerous. The person tried to open the bottom drawer, the one Elena had just locked with the silver key. The drawer did not move. The person made a soft sound of anger. It was a woman's voice. Elena was sure it was Sarah. Elena decided to act. She moved away from the wall and turned on her flashlight. The bright beam of light hit the person at the desk. "Are you looking for this, Sarah?" Elena asked. She held up the silver key. Sarah turned around quickly. She held her hand up to block the bright light. Her face was full of shock and then cold anger. She was not wearing her silk robe anymore. She was wearing a dark jacket and gloves. "You should not be here, Elena," Sarah said. Her voice was no longer bored. It was hard and sharp like a knife. Sarah stood by the desk. Her eyes were wide and angry. "Give me that key, Elena," she said. She stepped toward the detective. "You are just a worker. You do not understand what is happening in this family." Elena did not move. She kept the flashlight pointed at Sarah's face. "I understand enough," Elena replied. "I know about Mr. Thorne. I know you owe him $2 million. Is that why you are here? Did you steal the painting to pay your debt?" Sarah stopped. Her face turned very pale. She looked like she wanted to cry, but she was too angry. "Arthur was going to help me," she whispered. "He promised. But then he told me he had no money. He is a liar. He has this big house and a $5 million painting. But he says he is poor. He is not lying about the money." "Sarah," Elena said. She held up the bank letter. "The bank is taking this house. He is as desperate as you are. But stealing the painting is not the answer. Where is it?" "I don't have it," Sarah shouted. She hit the desk with her hand. "I came here to find the key. I thought the painting might be in a safe in this room. But someone else got to it first. I am not the thief. Elena. I am a victim." Elena watched Sarah carefully. The woman looked truly frustrated. If Sarah was looking for the key now, it meant she probably did not have the painting. Elena decided to check the technical side of the crime. "Stay here," Elena commanded. "Do not touch anything." Elena left the office and walked quickly to the end of the hall. She found a small, heavy door. This was the security room. She used her own set of tools to open the lock. Inside, the room was very small. There were 6 television screens on the wall. Usually, these screens showed every hallway and door in the manor. Now, the screens were all black. Elena moved her flashlight to the main control box under the table. She saw the problem immediately. The back of the box was open. A group of thick, colorful wires came out of the machine. These wires were the nerves of the house's security system. She leaned down to look closer. The wires were not just pulled out. They were cut. Each wire had a perfect, flat end. Someone had used a very sharp pair of metal cutters. Elena remembered the silver scissors she found in the secret tunnel. The cameras were stopped at exactly 10 o'clock. Elena noted. She saw a small clock on the wall that had stopped. She looked at the floor under the wires. She saw a small, shiny object. She picked it up. It was a tiny piece of metal, like a flake of silver. It was not from the wires. It looked like a piece of a jewelry or a button. Elena realized that the person who cut these wires was very fast. They knew exactly which wires to cut to stop the cameras but keep the lights on in some parts of the house. This was the work of someone who understood machines. She heard a noise behind her. She turned around quickly, but the hallway was empty. The manor was full of shadows, and every shadow felt like a person watching her. Elena put the metal flake in her bag. She needed to find out who had silver buttons on their clothes. Elena left the dark security room. Her mind was full of questions. She had the silver key from Victor's pocket, the bank letter from Arthur's desk, and the debt contract from Sarah's past. Now, she had a small silver flake from the broken security box. She needed to check the last guest. She needed to check on Martha. Martha was the quiet teacher. She seemed kind and helpful. She was the one who helped Victor and gave Arthur his medicine. But Elena knew that the quietest people often had the biggest secrets. She walked to the guest wing of the manor. Martha's room was at the end of the hall. Elena knocked on the door. There was no answer. She pushed the door open slowly. The room was empty. Martha was probably still downstairs with Victor or checking on Arthur. Elena stepped inside. The room was very neat. The bed was made, and a book sat on the bedside table. Elena began to search. She looked in the wardrobe. She saw Martha's simple clothes, brown sweaters, gray trousers, and a blue coat. Elena looked at the buttons on the blue coat. They were made of dark plastic, not silver. She looked at a pair of black shoes. They were dry and clean. Then, Elena looked under the bed. She saw a large, flat object. It was wrapped in a thick white cloth. Elena pulled it out carefully. The object was heavy. She sat on the floor and removed the cloth. Her eyes went wide. It was a painting. It was a picture of a bright bird in a dark forest. It was the golden bird. For a second, Elena thought she had found the stolen treasure. But then she looked closer. The colors were not quite right. The blue of the forest was too bright. The bird was not gold. It was painted in a dull yellow color. "It is a copy," Elena whispered. She looked at the bottom of the canvas. There were small jars of paint and several brushes hidden inside the cloth. One brush was still wet with yellow paint. Martha was not just an art teacher. She was an artist. She was making a copy of Arthur's famous painting. Why was she doing this? Was she going to switch the real painting for this copy? If she finished this painting and put it in the gallery, Arthur might not notice for a long time. It was a perfect plan for a thief. Elena looked at the yellow paint on the brushes. Then, she remembered the silver flake from the security room. She looked around the room for jewelry. On the table, she saw a small metal box. She opened it. Inside, there was a silver sweater. It was a fancy garment with many small, shiny silver buttons. Elena took the silver flake from her pocket and held it next to a button on the sweater. They were a perfect match. The flake was a piece of a button from Martha's silver sweater. Martha was in the security room. Elena said to herself. She cut the wires. Suddenly, Elena heard a soft sound at the door. She turned around quickly. Martha was standing in the doorway. She was no longer smiling. Her face was hard, and her eyes were cold. She looked at the copy of the painting on the floor. "You were not supposed to see that, Elena," Martha said. Her voice was no longer thin and weak. It was steady and dangerous. Elena stood up slowly. She did not look away from Martha. She held the small silver button flake in one hand and pointed to the copy of the painting with the other. "Why do you have this, Martha?" Elena asked. Her voice was cold and direct. "And why were you in the security room earlier tonight?" Martha did not move. She did not look scared anymore. Instead, she looked very tired. "I am an artist, Elena. I told you that. It is not a crime to paint a bird. Arthur knows I like his collection. I was making a study of the colors." "But the wires were cut," Elena said. "And I found this piece of your sweater in the security room. You were there when the cameras stopped working." Martha shook her head. "I went into that room because I was looking for Arthur. I was lost in the dark. I hit my arm against the metal box. That is probably when the button broke. I did not cut any wires. I do not even know how to stop a camera." Elena did not believe her, but she had no proof yet. She looked at the copy of the painting again. It was a good copy, but it was not finished. "If you are telling the truth, why did you hide this under your bed?" "Because Sarah is here," Martha replied. She stepped into the room. "Sarah hates me. She thinks I am a poor teacher. If she saw me painting a copy of a $5 million picture, she would call me a thief, just like she is doing now." Suddenly, Elena saw something on the floor in the hallway behind Martha. She moved past the teacher and knelt down. There was a dark, wet mark on the white carpet. Then there was another one. They were footprints. "Stay here, Martha," Elena commanded. The footprints were made of thick, dark mud. They were very fresh. The water from the mud was still soaking into the carpet. These were not the footprints of a woman's small shoe. They were large and heavy. They looked like the marks of a man's work boots. Elena followed the trail. The marks went away from the guest rooms and toward the main part of the house. They were wide apart, which meant the person was walking fast or running. The trail went past the stairs and straight toward the library. Elena reached the library door. It was a very large door made of oak. It was slightly open. A cold draft of air came from inside the room. Elena felt a chill on her neck. She turned off her flashlight. She wanted to move in silence. She pushed the door open. It made a soft, scraping sound on the rug. The library was a room full of tall bookshelves that reached the ceiling. Thousands of books sat in the shadows. The only light came from the flashes of lightning outside the large windows. The muddy footprints continued across the library floor. They led to a large wooden table in the center of the room. Elena saw a dark shape on the table. She moved closer. It was a wet bag, flat and rectangular. It was the exact size of the painting. Elena reached out to touch the bag. Suddenly, she heard a window closing at the back of the room. She turned around and saw a dark figure moving behind a heavy velvet curtain. "Stop!" Elena shouted. She ran toward the window, but the library was a maze of shelves. The person was fast. Elena felt the wind from the open window. The thief was close, and they were leaving a trail of mud across the house. Elena moved quickly through the dark library. The room was very large and smelled of old paper and wood. The tall bookshelves created long, dark paths. Every time the lightning flashed, the room became bright for a second. In those moments, the shadows of the shelves looked like giants on the walls. She followed the trail of wet mud. The footprints led her past the history books and toward the back of the room. There, near a large wooden table, the mud was thick. Elena saw the flat bag again. It was made of black plastic. It was the perfect size and shape to hold the golden bird. "I have you now," Elena thought. She reached for the bag, but a movement caught her eye. Behind the heavy velvet curtains, a shadow moved. It was a tall figure. The person was standing perfectly still, but the wind from the open window moved the fabric of the curtain. "I know you are there," Elena said. Her voice was steady. "The house is locked. The police will come in the morning. Put the painting down and step out." The shadow did not move. Then, suddenly, the figure ran. The person was very fast. They did not run toward the door. They ran toward the large window at the back of the library. Elena ran after them. Her boots made a fast, rhythmic sound on the wooden floor. The figure reached the window. With a strong movement, the person pushed the glass open. The wood hit the stone wall. A blast of cold rain and wind entered the library. Papers flew off the table and circled in the air like white birds. Elena reached the window just as the person jumped. She saw a flash of a dark coat and heavy boots. The person landed in the mud outside and began to run toward the dark woods. The rain was so thick that the figure disappeared in seconds. Elena looked down at the ground. She could not follow them into the dark forest without a better light and a plan. She was alone in the house with the guests. She turned back to the wooden table. She picked up the black plastic bag. It felt light. Her heart sank. She pulled the top of the bag open and looked inside. There was no painting. There was no canvas. Instead, the bag was full of old, heavy newspapers. It was a trick. Elena whispered. The thief wanted her to follow the bag. The thief wanted her to see the shadow. But why? If the person in the library was a distraction, where was the real painting? And who was the person who jumped out of the window? Elena looked at the table again. In the spot where the bag had been, she saw a small book. It was an old diary with a brown leather cover. It was wet from the rain, but it looked very important. She picked it up and held it close to her flashlight. On the first page, it said, property of Silas Vance. Silas was Arthur's father. Elena realized the thief was not just looking for the painting. They were looking for the history of the manor. She closed the window and locked it. The room became quiet again, but Elena felt a new sense of danger. The game was much bigger than she thought. Elena sat in a high-backed chair in the corner of the library. She kept her flashlight low, its beam focused only on the yellowed pages of Silas Vance's diary. Outside, the thunder shook the stone walls of the manor, but inside, Elena found a different kind of storm. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, the ink fading at the edges. She flipped past pages of boring business notes until she reached an entry dated 30 years ago. The golden bird is finally home. The diary read, Arthur thinks it is merely a beautiful piece of art. He sees the gold and the blue and thinks of money. He does not understand that the bird is the guardian of the family's true foundation. If the bird flies away, the house will fall. I have hidden the truth within its feathers. Elena's heart skipped a beat. She remembered the empty frame in the gallery. The thief hadn't just taken the painting, they had cut the canvas out. If the truth was hidden within its feathers, then the painting itself was more than art. It was a container. She read further. Silas wrote about a hollow space and a secondary layer. He mentioned that the real treasure of Silver Oak Manor wasn't the painting itself, but what lay beneath the oil and pigment. It's a map. Elena whispered. The painting is a map to something else hidden in the house. This changed everything. If Arthur was poor, perhaps he was trying to find his father's hidden treasure to save his home. If Sarah or Martha knew about the secret, they weren't just looking for a valuable canvas. They were looking for the key to a much larger fortune. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the page. Elena didn't hear a sound, but she felt the change in the air. She looked up. Standing in the doorway of the library was Arthur Vance. He was leaning heavily on a wooden cane, his face half hidden in the darkness. He was no longer the frail, dying man she had seen in the bedroom. He looked tall, stern, and very focused. You have a curious mind, Elena, Arthur said. His voice was no longer thin. It was deep and resonant. Elena slowly closed the diary. You're feeling better, I see. The medicine Martha gave me was very effective, Arthur replied. He walked into the room, the sound of his cane echoing on the floor. But you shouldn't be reading private family papers. It's rude for a guest. I stopped being a guest when someone tried to kill my driver and steal a masterpiece, Elena said, standing up. She kept the diary in her hand. Did you know your father hid something in the painting, Arthur? Or is that why you hired me? To make sure no one else found it before you did. Arthur stopped walking. He was only a few feet away. In the dim light, Elena noticed something she hadn't seen before. On the lapel of his blue velvet jacket, a small silver pin shaped like a bird was missing. There were only a few broken threads where it used to be. My father was a man of many riddles, Arthur said, his eyes narrowing. He believed that only a true Vance should hold the keys to this house. The painting is mine. Everything in this house is mine, including the debt, Elena asked, holding up the bank letter she had found earlier. Arthur's face twisted into a mask of rage. The debt is a lie told by people who want to take my history. I will find the bird, Elena, and I will find what is inside it, with or without your help. Before Elena could respond, the library door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Arthur had locked her in. Elena ran to the library door and pulled the handle. It didn't budge. Arthur had turned the heavy iron key from the outside, and the oak was far too thick to break down. She was trapped in a room full of dead men's words while the living were busy committing crimes. Arthur! She shouted, banging her fist against the wood. This won't save you. The truth is already coming out. There was no reply. The only sound was the receding sound of his cane on the marble floor of the hallway. He was going somewhere, likely to the gallery or to find Sarah and Martha. Elena didn't waste time. She turned back to the room, her flashlight beam sweeping across the spines of the books. If Arthur was desperate enough to lock her in, he was planning his final move. She returned to the desk and grabbed Silas Vance's diary. She needed to find that hollow space he mentioned. She flipped to the very back of the diary. There, tucked into the leather binding, was a small, hand-drawn diagram. It wasn't a map of the house, it was a diagram of the painting's frame. The frame is the protector, but the canvas is the map. To see the truth, one must look behind the blue forest. The gold is a lie, the copper is the way. The gold is a lie. Elena repeated. She thought of the heavy gold frame still hanging in the gallery. He didn't say the painting was the treasure. He said the truth was behind the blue forest. She looked at the library windows. They were locked, but she remembered the figure who had jumped earlier. She walked to the window the shadow had used. On the sill, she saw a small, jagged piece of dark fabric. She picked it up. It wasn't from a coat, it was a piece of a silk scarf. A very expensive, very specific silk scarf. Sarah. Elena whispered. Sarah hadn't been looking for the painting to sell it. She had been looking for Silas's secrets. But if Sarah was the one who jumped out the window, who was the figure Elena had just seen in the hall? The house was becoming a theater of masks. Elena knew she couldn't wait for morning. She looked at the massive bookshelves. In many old manors, libraries were connected to the service tunnels or the master's bedroom. She began pulling on the decorative wooden carvings at the ends of the shelves. Near the fireplace, she pressed a small wooden rose. With a low, grinding noise, a section of the bookshelf swung inward. It was another secret passage, narrower and darker than the one in the basement. Every wall in this house has ears. She muttered. She stepped into the dark crawlspace. The air was thick with the smell of cedar and old dust. She followed the path, feeling the cold stone on one side and the wall on the other. After 20 paces, she reached a small wooden slat. She peered through it. She was looking into Arthur's bedroom. The room was dimly lit by a single candle. Arthur was there, but he wasn't resting. He was standing over a large wooden table, and on that table lay a piece of canvas. It was the blue forest from the Golden Bird. He had a pair of tweezers in his hand, and he was carefully peeling away a thin layer of the paint. Underneath the blue oil, something else was shining. Not gold, but a dull, reddish metal. Copper. Elena breathed. Arthur let out a dry, hacking laugh. Finally, the map to the vault. Elena realized the painting wasn't the goal. It was the key to a vault hidden somewhere on the grounds, a vault that likely held the remains of the Vance fortune. She needed to get out of the wall and stop him before he could disappear into the storm. Elena found a small iron lever hidden behind a support beam in the crawlspace. She pulled it, and a section of the oak paneling in Arthur's bedroom slid open with a whisper. She stepped into the room, her flashlight extinguished. The only light came from the flickering candle on Arthur's desk, casting his shadow against the heavy velvet curtains like a jagged ghost. "The hollow space is quite clever, Arthur," Elena said, her voice cutting through the silence. Arthur didn't jump. He didn't even turn around. He continued to scrape at the canvas with his tweezers, his movements precise and obsessive. "My father was a paranoid man, Elena. He didn't trust banks, and he certainly didn't trust his own son. He knew I would spend the family fortune, so he buried the heart of it." Elena walked toward the table. Under the layer of blue oil paint, a thin sheet of etched copper was now visible. It wasn't just a map, it was a complex mechanical diagram. "You cut the canvas yourself," she stated. "You staged the theft, cut the wires, and played the part of the dying man to keep us distracted while you retrieved the map." "I had to," Arthur hissed, finally looking at her. His eyes were bright with a feverish light. "The bank is coming. Sarah is breathing down my neck for debts I can't pay. I needed the vault. But I couldn't find the key. I thought it was in the painting, but the painting is only the guide." "Where is the vault, Arthur?" He pointed a trembling finger at the copper plate. The etching showed the manor's grounds, but one point was marked with a deep, circular indentation. It was the fountain. The stone fountain in the garden where Elena had found Victor. Victor found it first, didn't he? Elena asked. "That's why he was out there. He wasn't running away. He was looking for the entrance. And someone stopped him." "It wasn't me," Arthur snapped. "I was here, waiting for the power to go out so I could strike." "Then it was me," a voice said from the doorway. Sarah Miller stood there, her dark jacket damp and her expression cold. She held a heavy brass fire poker in her hand. The silk scarf around her neck was torn. The same silk Elena had found on the library window. "I saw Victor sneaking out to the garden earlier today," Sarah said, stepping into the room. "I followed him. He found a lever near the fountain's base. He was going to take the treasure for himself, so I silenced him. But the vault wouldn't open. It needs a specific key." Elena reached into her pocket and felt the heavy silver key she had taken from Victor. The key with the bird-shaped handle. Victor hadn't been stealing it. He had likely found it in the house and was trying to protect the Vance legacy, or sell it. "You're all vultures," Elena said, looking from the desperate old man to the cold-eyed businesswoman. "The truth Silas hid wasn't just money, was it? It was a trap for people exactly like you." "The key, Elena," Sarah said, raising the poker. "I saw you take it from Victor's pocket. Give it to me, or the storm won't be the only thing that claims a life tonight." The room felt smaller than ever. The wind howled against the glass, and for a moment, the three of them stood in a triangle of greed, debt, and duty. The candle on the desk flickered violently as the wind rattled the window panes. Elena kept her hand over the silver key in her pocket. She looked at Sarah, whose eyes were fixed on Elena's jacket with a desperate hunger. Then she looked at Arthur, who was clutching the copper map like a holy relic. "The vault won't save either of you," Elena said, her voice echoing with a calm that she didn't entirely feel. "Sarah, you think $2 million will fix your life, but you've already committed an assault. And Arthur, you've betrayed your father's memory for a pile of coins that might not even exist." "They exist," Arthur shrieked. "My father spoke of the ancestral nest. He wouldn't have built all this, the tunnels, the maps, the alarms, for nothing." Sarah took a step closer, the heavy brass poker gleaming. "The key, Elena. Now, or I'll take it from your cold hands." Suddenly, the bedroom door creaked open further. Martha stepped into the room. She wasn't carrying a weapon, and she wasn't wearing her silver-buttoned sweater. She was wearing a simple, dark raincoat, and her face was set in an expression of deep disappointment. "It's over, Sarah," Martha said. "I've already been to the kitchen. I managed to get the landline working for a brief second before the wires gave out again. I sent a distress signal to the local station. They can't cross the bridge yet, but they know we're here." Sarah spun around, her face twisting. "You little mouse. You've been playing the victim while you were painting your little fakes." "I was painting a tribute to a masterpiece I knew was going to be destroyed by your greed," Martha replied. She looked at Elena. "The fountain isn't just a vault, Elena. I've studied the architecture of this manor for my thesis. The fountain is the drainage hub for the entire estate." Elena's eyes widened. She looked at the copper map on the table. The circular indentation wasn't just a marker for treasure. It was a pressure plate. Arthur, Elena said quickly, if you open that vault during a storm this size, what happens to the drainage? Arthur froze. His father's words from the diary flashed through his mind. If the bird flies away, the house will fall. The pressure. Arthur whispered, his face turning even paler. The tunnels. The foundation. The treasure was never gold. Elena realized. Silas Vance was a civil engineer before he was a collector. The vault is a floodgate. He hidden the family's true wealth, the deeds and the gold. There because it was the most secure place, but it was also the house's life support. Sarah didn't care about engineering. She saw her window of opportunity closing. With a scream of frustration, she lunged not at Elena, but at the table to grab the copper map. In the confusion, Elena moved. She didn't go for Sarah. She grabbed the heavy candle and threw the room into total darkness. Martha! Get to the stairs! Elena yelled. The room erupted into chaos. The sound of the brass poker hitting the wooden table followed by Arthur's cry of "My map!" filled the air. Elena used her knowledge of the room's layout to slip past the desk. She grabbed Arthur by the arm, not to hurt him, but to pull him away from the madness. We're going to the fountain, Elena said into the dark. But not to open it. We're going to lock the secondary seal before the storm collapses the basement. She didn't wait for an answer. She dragged Arthur toward the secret panel, leaving Sarah screaming in the darkness of the bedroom. The final piece of the mystery was no longer about who stole the bird, but whether any of them would survive the night at Silver Oak Manor. The air inside the secret passage between the library and the master bedroom was thick with the scent of wet earth and ancient cedar. Elena moved with a practiced grace, her hand firmly gripping Arthur's arm. The old man was breathing heavily, his earlier burst of adrenaline fading into a ragged exhaustion. Behind them, they could still hear Sarah's muffled screams of rage and the sound of furniture being overturned as she searched for a light in the darkened bedroom. This way, Arthur, Elena whispered, her voice cutting through the gloom. The foundations are groaning. If your father's diary is correct, the pressure from the storm is already compromising the lower levels. They reached a narrow iron ladder that descended into the darkness. Below, the sound of rushing water echoed, a hollow, metallic roar that suggested the drainage pipes were already at capacity. Arthur hesitated, his hands trembling as he gripped the cold rungs. My father always said the house was a living thing. He murmured, his voice ghost-like. He said it needed to breathe. I thought he was speaking in metaphors. I never realized he meant it literally. As they descended, the temperature dropped sharply. Elena's flashlight beam revealed a thin layer of water already swirling around the base of the ladder. The ancestral nest wasn't just a vault. It was the heart of a complex hydraulic system. Every gallon of rain hitting the roof was funneled toward this central hub. If the floodgate wasn't managed, the hydrostatic pressure would eventually buckle the floor of the basement, causing the entire west wing of Silver Oak Manor to sink into the mud. The silver key. Arthur gasped, leaning against the damp stone wall. The one you took from Victor. It doesn't just open the vault, does it? It's a regulator. Exactly. Elena replied, checking her watch. Silas Vance didn't just hide his wealth. He made sure that whoever held the key also held the responsibility of keeping the manor standing. It's a fail-safe. You can't have the gold without protecting the house. Victor must have realized the water was rising too fast. He wasn't trying to steal the treasure, he was trying to save us all. They waded through the ankle-deep water toward a small, heavy door that led out into the garden near the fountain. The wood was swollen from the damp, and it took the combined strength of Elena's shoulder and Arthur's weight to shove it open. Outside, the storm was a physical wall. The wind shrieked through the stone arches, and the rain was so dense it felt like being underwater. Elena looked toward the fountain, where the silhouette of the stone bird sat perched atop the centerpiece. It looked less like a work of art now and more like a silent sentinel watching the world drown. They had to reach it, but the garden path had turned into a river of sludge. Elena and Arthur struggled through the mire, the mud clutching at their boots like hungry hands. Every few steps, a flash of lightning illuminated the garden, turning the falling rain into shards of white glass. The fountain stood 20 yards away, a dark monolith amidst the swirling grey chaos of the storm. Elena could see the structural cracks in the stone base. The pressure from the underground reservoirs was clearly reaching a breaking point. "Hold on to the statue!" Elena shouted over the roar of the wind. She guided Arthur toward a stone nymph at the edge of the path, giving him a solid anchor point. She pressed forward alone, her flashlight beam cutting a weak path through the deluge. As she reached the base of the fountain, she saw the mechanism Silas Vance had hidden so carefully. Near the bottom, disguised as a decorative floral carving, was a small, circular keyhole. It was surrounded by an etched copper plate, identical to the map she had seen in Arthur's room. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver key. The bird-shaped handle felt cold and heavy in her palm. Just as she moved to insert it into the lock, a shadow detached itself from the darkness of the trees. "Step away from it, Elena." Sarah Miller emerged from the rain, her clothes soaked and her face a mask of desperate fury. She was no longer carrying the fire poker. Instead, she held a small, black handgun. Her hand was shaking, but the barrel was pointed directly at Elena's chest. The greed that had been simmering in her all night had finally boiled over into something lethal. "You don't want to do this, Sarah," Elena said, keeping her voice as steady as possible despite the wind. "The water pressure under this fountain is immense. If you interfere with the sequence, the whole structure will explode. We aren't looking for gold anymore, we're looking for survival." "Liars. All of you!" Sarah screamed, her voice cracking. "Arthur lied about the money. Martha lied about the painting. You're lying about the vault. You just want the ancestral nest for yourself. Give me the key, or I swear I'll end this right here." Arthur tried to move forward, his voice lost to the gale, but Sarah swung the gun toward him, her finger tightening on the trigger. "Stay back, old man. You've had your chance to save this family. Now it's my turn to take what I'm owed." Elena looked at the keyhole, then at Sarah. She saw the madness in the woman's eyes, the kind of madness that comes from a life built on debt and deception. Sarah didn't see a floodgate, she saw a lottery ticket. Elena knew that if she handed over the key, Sarah would turn it without understanding the mechanics, and the resulting back pressure would likely kill them all. "The bird has to fly, Sarah," Elena said, her fingers tracing the silver wings of the key. "But if you shoot me, you'll never know which way it turns." For a heartbeat, the only sound was the thrumming of the rain against the stone. Sarah lowered the gun slightly, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about? Which way it turns?" Silas Vance was a master of traps. Elena lied, her mind working at lightning speed. "The lock has a dual-chambered mechanism. Turn it to the right, and the vault opens. Turn it to the left, and it triggers a collapse of the underground support pillars. My father was a locksmith, Sarah. I know how these Vance locks work. If you kill me, you have a 50% chance of burying yourself alive." It was a gamble, a desperate bluff to buy seconds. Sarah glanced at the fountain, then back at Elena, her greed warring with her cowardice. "You're bluffing," she spat, though the tremor in her voice suggested she wasn't sure. "Am I?" Elena asked, taking a slow step toward the keyhole. "Look at the copper etching. See the arrows? They don't indicate direction, they indicate pressure. If you don't vent the air first, the gold inside will be crushed by the weight of the water. Is that what you want? A handful of flattened metal?" Sarah's resolve flickered. She wanted the money too much to risk destroying it. "Fine," she snarled, gesturing with the gun. Open the vent. But if I see you try to pocket so much as a coin, I'll kill you and Arthur both. Elena knelt in the mud, her back to Sarah. She inserted the silver key into the floral carving. It fit perfectly. She felt the heavy tumblers click into place, a sensation of cold, ancient precision. She didn't turn it to the right or left. Instead, she pushed the key inward. A deep, low thud vibrated through the ground, followed by the sound of heavy metal gears grinding against stone. The water in the fountain's basin began to drain rapidly, disappearing into a hidden vortex. At the same time, the stone bird atop the fountain began to rotate. "It's opening!" Arthur cried out from his position by the statue. The base of the fountain didn't slide away to reveal a chest of gold. Instead, a small stone door at eye level on the central pillar creaked open. Inside was a small, velvet-lined alcove. Sarah pushed past Elena, her eyes wide with anticipation, her gun lowered as she reached for the prize. But there were no gold bars. There were no diamonds. Inside the alcove sat a single, weathered leather tube and a small, leaden box. Sarah grabbed the tube and tore it open, her face contorting as she pulled out a roll of parchment. "What is this?" she shrieked, throwing the papers into the mud. "Maps. Deeds. Where is the money? Where is the gold? The wealth of a family is its land and its history, Sarah," Elena said quietly, standing up and wiping the mud from her coat. The ancestral nest wasn't a bank. It was an archive. These are the original land grants and the mineral rights to the valley. They're worth millions, but they can't be sold on the black market. They have to be processed through a court of law. Sarah looked at the papers, then at Elena, her face turning a deep, dangerous red. She realized she had risked everything for a treasure she couldn't use to pay a criminal like Mr. Thorne. She raised the gun again, her eyes wild. "Then nobody gets them." The rain hammered against the stone fountain with a sound like a million drumming fingers. Sarah's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated desperation. The gun in her hand trembled, the metal slick with rainwater, but her eyes were fixed on the leaden box and the useless parchments scattered in the mud. To her, these were not mineral rights or historical land grants. They were pieces of trash that couldn't stop the debt collectors from knocking on her door. She was a woman who had gambled her life on a dream of gold, only to find a chest of paper. "I won't let it end like this," Sarah shrieked, her voice cracking against the wind. "Arthur, tell me where the real money is. You've hidden it somewhere else. The gold, the jewelry. Silas wouldn't have just left a library of deeds." Arthur, still leaning heavily against the stone nymph, looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. The adrenaline that had sustained him was beginning to leak away, leaving him looking older and more fragile than ever. "You never understood my father, Sarah," he shouted back. He was a man who believed in the soil. He believed that if you owned the land, you owned the future. The money was spent long ago to build this manor, to preserve the valley. The wealth is in the potential of the earth, not in a pile of bars. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger. Elena saw the muscle in the woman's jaw lock. The air felt heavy with the scent of ozone and the impending threat of a strike. "Then the earth can have you all," Sarah whispered, her eyes glazing over with a terrifying finality. Before she could squeeze the trigger, a sharp, metallic clack echoed from the direction of the manor. A beam of light, far stronger than Elena's flashlight, cut through the rain. It was the manor's emergency floodlight, suddenly coming to life as the generator in the basement finally stabilized. The sudden brightness blinded Sarah for a crucial second. She flinched, shielding her eyes with her free hand. Elena didn't hesitate. She lunged through the mud, her boots skidding on the slick grass. She didn't go for the gun. She grabbed Sarah's wrist and twisted it upward. The gun discharged, the sound a sharp, flat pop that was instantly swallowed by a roll of thunder. The bullet went wide, striking the stone wing of the bird atop the fountain. The two women tumbled into the mud. Sarah fought with the strength of a cornered animal, biting and clawing, but Elena's training took over. She used her weight to pin Sarah's arm and applied a sharp pressure to the nerve. The gun slipped from Sarah's fingers, disappearing into the dark, swirling water of the fountain's drainage basin. "It's over, Sarah," Elena grunted, hauling the woman up and forcing her arms behind her back. From the shadows of the garden path, two figures emerged. It was Martha, holding a heavy industrial lantern, and a stumbling, bandaged Victor. The driver looked pale and weak, but he was upright, his eyes clear for the first time that night. "I saw her," Victor wheezed, pointing a shaking finger at Sarah. "She was the one. I found the lever. I was going to tell Mr. Vance about the water levels. She followed me. She hit me with the stone." Martha stepped forward, her face stern. "The police are on the other side of the bridge, Sarah. They're using a raft to cross the overflow. You have nowhere left to run." Sarah went limp in Elena's grip, her spirit finally breaking. She sank to her knees in the mud, sobbing not for her crimes, but for the life she was about to lose. Elena looked up at the fountain. The stone bird's wing was shattered, a jagged scar across the family's legacy. The treasure was safe, but the house was still groaning. The real work was just beginning. The floodlights from the manor cast long, dramatic shadows across the garden, turning the falling rain into a shimmering curtain of silver. Elena released her hold on the weeping Sarah, allowing Martha to drape a heavy blanket over the broken woman. Victor, though still unsteady, moved toward Arthur, helping the old man stay upright as the wind continued to howl. "We can't stay out here," Elena commanded, her voice cutting through the emotional debris of the confrontation. "The drainage hub is open, but the secondary seal in the basement is still loose. If we don't lock it, the back pressure from the rising river will flood the tunnels and compromise the entire foundation." She gathered the wet parchments and the leaden box from the fountain's alcove, tucking them securely inside her waterproof bag. These documents were Arthur's only hope for saving Silver Oak Manor from the bank, and she wasn't about to let the elements finish what Sarah had started. "Victor, take Arthur and Sarah back to the main hall," Elena directed. "Martha, I need you with me. Your knowledge of the architecture. You said there's a bypass valve near the service stairs." Martha nodded, her expression grim. "Yes, but it hasn't been turned in decades. It'll be rusted shut. Then we'll break it open," Elena said. The two women hurried back into the manor, entering through the servants' entrance to avoid the rising water in the main gardens. The basement was now a different world. The quiet, dusty cellar Elena had explored earlier was gone, replaced by a dark, echoing chamber filled with the sound of rushing water. The floor was covered in 6 inches of cold, murky liquid that swirled around their ankles. Elena led the way, her flashlight beam reflecting off the surface of the flood. They reached the mechanical room, where the generator was humming with a strained, high-pitched whine. In the corner, a massive iron wheel was half submerged. This was the secondary seal, the final barrier between the manor's interior and the vast network of underground drainage pipes. "If we turn this, it closes the intake from the fountain," Martha explained, her voice echoing off the damp stone walls. "But the pressure is coming from the outside now. We're fighting the weight of the entire storm." Elena grabbed the wheel. It was freezing and slick with grease. She pulled, but it didn't move an inch. Martha joined her, both women leaning their full weight against the iron. The metal groaned, a deep, protesting sound that felt like the house itself was screaming. "Again!" Elena shouted. Slowly, agonizingly, the wheel began to turn. With every inch, the sound of the rushing water changed, shifting from a roar to a hiss. As the seal tightened, Elena noticed something strange in the corner of the room. A small, wooden door that she hadn't seen before was being forced open by the water pressure. It wasn't a door to a room, but to a small, vertical shaft. As the flashlight beam hit the opening, Elena saw a glimpse of something white and rectangular floating in the rising water inside the shaft. "Wait," Elena said, letting go of the wheel once it was locked. She waded over to the shaft and reached in, her arm submerged to the shoulder. She pulled out a heavy, canvas-wrapped bundle. She peeled back the wet fabric. Inside was a second painting. It was an identical copy of the golden bird, but the technique was different. Finer, more delicate. The colors were vibrant, untouched by time. The one in the gallery. Martha whispered, leaning over Elena's shoulder. "That was the copy. This is the original." Silas didn't just hide a map. He hid the real masterpiece where no one would ever think to look, in the very heart of the drainage system. Elena looked at the brilliant gold of the bird's feathers. Silas Vance had played the ultimate game. He had left a decoy for the world to see, a map for his son to follow, and the true treasure hidden in the one place that required a person to save the house in order to find it. With the secondary seal locked and the original painting recovered, a strange, heavy silence began to settle over the basement, broken only by the steady drip of water from the ceiling. The immediate threat of the house collapsing had passed, but Elena's internal alarm was still ringing. She stood in the water, the original golden bird cradled in her arms, and looked back toward the stairs. "Martha, take the painting upstairs," Elena said, her voice low and urgent. "Find Victor. Tell him to guard the main hall and not to let Sarah out of his sight." "What are you going to do?" Martha asked, her eyes darting toward the dark corners of the cellar. "I need to check the library one more time." Elena replied, "There's still one piece of this puzzle that doesn't fit. The shadow I saw jumping from the window. Sarah was in the garden, but that figure in the library, they moved differently. Faster. More like someone who knew the shadows better than she did." Martha didn't argue. She took the heavy, canvas-wrapped original and hurried up the stairs. Elena waited until the sound of Martha's footsteps faded before turning her flashlight back toward the secret passage that led from the basement to the library. She moved with extreme caution. If there was a third party in the house, an accomplice of Sarah's or perhaps someone sent by the mysterious Mr. Thorne, they would be cornered now that the exits were being watched by the approaching police. The library was deathly quiet. The wind still rattled the windows, but the interior felt stagnant. Elena stepped through the secret bookshelf entrance, her flashlight off. She relied on the occasional flashes of lightning to navigate. She moved toward the large wooden table where she had found Silas's diary. The diary was gone. Elena felt a cold spike of adrenaline. She had left it on the table in her rush to follow Arthur. Now, the space was empty. She scanned the floor with her flashlight for a brief second. No muddy footprints this time. The person was being careful. "I know you're here," Elena said, her voice projecting into the darkness. "The police are crossing the river. There's nowhere left for you to go. You have the diary, but it won't do you any good. The secrets are already out." A soft, melodic laugh drifted from the upper gallery of the library, the narrow walkway lined with old maps and globes. "Secrets are like ghosts, Miss Elena," a voice replied. It was a man's voice, smooth and cultured. "They only have power if they remain hidden. Once they are known, they become liabilities." Elena pointed her light upward. Standing on the gallery, leaning casually against a shelf of ancient law books, was a man in a sharp, grey suit. He looked completely dry, as if the storm outside didn't exist. In his hand, he held the leather-bound diary of Silas Vance. "And who are you?" Elena asked, her hand moving toward the heavy flashlight she used as a weapon. "A representative of a very interested party," the man said, smiling thinly. "Mr. Thorne sends his regards." He was quite disappointed to learn that Sarah Miller was so incompetent. She was supposed to retrieve the deeds and the map quietly. Instead, she turned this into a gothic melodrama. "The deeds are with me," Elena said. And the painting is safe. You're empty-handed. Am I? The man tapped the diary. Silas Vance was a very thorough man. This diary contains more than just the location of a fountain vault. It contains the names of everyone Silas helped over the years. Some very powerful names. Names that Mr. Thorne would find very useful for future negotiations. The man turned and began to walk toward the back of the gallery. I'm afraid I can't let you keep the deeds, Elena. But for now, the diary will suffice as a consolation prize. Tell Arthur he can keep his house. For a price. He stepped toward the window, the same one Sarah had used. But before he could reach it, the library doors burst open. It wasn't the police. It was Victor, pale and bleeding, holding the old silver key like a dagger. You're not taking anything else from this house. Victor shouted. The man in the grey suit sighed, reached into his jacket, and pulled out a silenced pistol. How very tiresome. The silence of the library was shattered not by a gunshot, but by the heavy, rhythmic thud of the manor's front door being battered by the elements. Inside, the tension was a physical weight. Julian, the man in the grey suit, held the silenced pistol with a casualness that was more terrifying than overt aggression. He didn't even look at Victor. His eyes remained fixed on Elena, recognizing her as the only true threat in the room. Victor, get back. Elena commanded, her voice low and dangerous. She didn't take her eyes off the barrel of the gun. He's a professional. You're hurt and exhausted. Don't give him a reason to use that. Victor hesitated, his knuckles white around the silver key. His breath came in ragged gasps, his face a ghostly shade of grey under the flickering emergency lights. He has the diary, Elena. Everything Mr. Vance worked for. The names, the history. If he leaves with that, the house is never truly free. Julian chuckled, a soft, dry sound that barely rose above the whistling wind. The boy has spirit, I'll give him that. But spirit doesn't stop around. Now, Miss Elena, you've been quite the thorn in our side tonight. I'd hate to ruin such a tailored coat. Just step aside and let me use the window. Sarah is already being dealt with by your friends downstairs. Let's not make this a double tragedy. Elena slowly moved her hand toward the heavy brass lamp on the desk beside her. She knew she couldn't outrun a bullet, but she could change the environment. Mr. Thorne must be getting desperate if he's sending someone like you to steal a dead man's journal. What's the matter? Are the other investments failing? Julian's smile didn't falter, but his eyes sharpened. Information is the only currency that never devalues. Detective. Silas Vance was a quiet power broker. He didn't just save land, he saved reputations. This diary is a ledger of favors. In the right hands. Thorne's hands. It's worth 10 times what that bird painting could ever bring at an auction. Suddenly, a massive crack of thunder vibrated through the very floorboards of the manor. The chandelier above them swayed, its crystals chiming a frantic tune. In that split second of distraction, Victor lunged. He wasn't aiming for the gun. He threw the heavy silver key directly at Julian's head. It was a clumsy, desperate move. Julian flinched, the key whistling past his ear and shattering a glass display case behind him. But the distraction was enough. Elena grabbed the heavy brass lamp and hurled it at the emergency floodlight in the corner of the room. The library plunged into absolute darkness. Down! Elena yelled, diving behind the thick oak desk. 2 soft puffs echoed through the room, the sound of the silenced pistol firing into the dark. Elena heard the bullets thud into the leather-bound books on the shelves behind her. She didn't wait to see if Julian was moving. She crawled through the darkness, her memory of the library's layout serving as her only map. She knew the secret passage behind the history section was only 10 feet away. If she could get Victor and herself into the crawl space, they could flank him. Victor! The shelves! Move now! She hissed. But Victor didn't respond. The only sound in the library was the wind screaming through the open window and the steady, predatory footsteps of Julian moving across the carpet, his suppressed weapon searching for a target in the black. Elena burst out of the secret panel, her boots hitting the gallery floor with a sharp crack. Julian was struggling under the massive weight of the velvet curtains, a tangled shadow fighting to find his weapon. Elena didn't give him the chance. She lunged forward, her knee pinning the center of the fabric where he lay trapped. "Victor! The diary!" she yelled. Victor scrambled out behind her, his hands diving into the folds of the heavy cloth. He found the shape of the leather-bound book and yanked it free. Julian let out a muffled growl of rage, his hand finally breaking through the fabric, the silenced pistol emerging like a snake. Elena grabbed his wrist and slammed it against the hardwood. The gun skittered across the floor, sliding through the railings and falling 20 feet to the library floor below. "It's over, Julian," Elena hissed, putting her full weight onto his arm. "The police are in the garden. There are no more exits." Through the open window, the sound of shouting and the splashing of heavy boots grew louder. The blue and red lights were now illuminating the entire library, reflecting off the thousands of books that Julian had intended to burn. Arthur and Martha appeared in the doorway. Martha was holding the industrial lantern, its light flooding the gallery. She saw the struggle and ran toward them, helping Elena keep the heavy curtains pinned over the mercenary. "We have it," Victor gasped, holding Silas Vance's diary to his chest like a shield. "He didn't get away with it." Arthur walked slowly toward the gallery. His face was wet with rain and his clothes were ruined, but his eyes were fixed on the diary. "The names," he whispered. "The history of Silver Oak Safe." Elena looked at Julian, whose face was now visible as the fabric shifted. He wasn't smiling anymore. His eyes were cold and empty, the look of a man who knew he had failed a very dangerous employer. "Thorn won't forget this, Elena," he muttered. "This house is still a target. Then I'll be here when he sends the next one." Elena replied, her voice as cold as the storm outside. The library doors burst open again, but this time it was the authorities. Uniformed officers flooded the room, their flashlights dancing across the bookshelves. They climbed the stairs to the gallery, taking Julian into custody and helping Victor to his feet. As the sun began to break through the grey clouds of the morning, the rain finally slowed to a drizzle. Elena stood on the front steps of the manor, watching the police lead Sarah and Julian away. The Golden Bird was safe, the deeds were recovered, and the foundation of the house was secure. Arthur stood beside her, looking out over the valley his father had protected. "I don't know how to thank you, Elena." "Just keep the library locked, Arthur," Elena said with a tired smile. "And maybe, finally, finish that painting." The rain slowed to a whisper as the first light of a grey, cold dawn began to creep through the broken library window. Elena and Victor had reached the main floor just as Julian struggled beneath the suffocating weight of the velvet curtains. The man was strong, but the iron rod had fallen across his legs, trapping him momentarily. Elena reached him first. She didn't hesitate. She kicked the silenced pistol away across the floor and knelt on Julian's chest, her weight pinning him down. She reached into his jacket and pulled out the leather-bound diary. "You're finished, Julian," Elena said, her voice hard as flint. "The police are in the garden. Mr. Thorn is going to have to find a new representative." Julian stopped struggling. He looked up at her, his face bruised and streaked with dust, but he didn't look defeated. He looked amused. "You think the police matter? You think a jail cell can stop a man who holds the secrets of the elite? Look at the last 10 pages of that book, Elena. Look at who Silas Vance was helping." Elena gripped the diary. She felt the urge to throw it into the fire, to end the cycle of blackmail and debt that had nearly destroyed this house. But she was a professional. She opened the diary to the very back. The names weren't just local politicians or businessmen. They were judges, high-ranking officers, and even members of the very board that oversaw the bank trying to seize Silver Oak Manor. Silas hadn't just been a power broker, he had been a shield. He had kept these records not to hurt people, but to ensure they stayed honest. He held the favors as collateral for the peace of the valley. Silas wasn't a blackmailer. Elena whispered, realizing the truth. He was a guardian. He kept these records to stop people like Thorn from taking over. And now Thorn has the power to do it. Julian sneered. Unless you give me that book. If it goes into evidence, it becomes public. Every one of those men will be ruined, and the valley will be torn apart by the scandal. Is that what you want, detective? To destroy the very thing Arthur is trying to save. Elena looked at Arthur, who had just entered the library, leaning on Martha's arm. He looked at the diary in Elena's hand, his eyes filled with a deep, weary understanding. My father always said the truth is a heavy burden. Arthur said softly. He didn't want me to have it because he didn't think I was strong enough to carry it. He was right. I wanted the gold. I wanted the easy way out. He walked toward Elena and touched the cover of the journal. Give it to the police, Elena. Let the truth come out. If the house falls because of it, then it was built on a foundation of lies anyway. I'd rather be a poor man with a clean conscience than a rich one hiding in the shadows. Julian's face finally fell. The one thing he couldn't fight was a man who no longer cared about his own ruin. At that moment, the library doors were thrown open. A team of officers in yellow raincoats, led by a soaked sergeant, burst into the room. Police. Nobody move. Elena handed the diary to the sergeant. His name is Julian. He's a representative of the Thorn Group. You'll find his weapon under the history shelves, and the diary. Well, the diary contains everything you need to clean up this county. As Julian was led away in handcuffs, the storm outside finally began to break. Silver Oak Manor was still standing, scarred and battered, but for the first time in 30 years, the shadows were gone. The grey light of dawn finally broke through the heavy clouds, casting a cold, pale glow over the bruised landscape of Silver Oak Manor. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world of broken branches, deep mud, and a silence that felt heavier than the thunder ever had. Inside the manor, the atmosphere was one of exhaustion and quiet realization. The frantic adrenaline of the night had evaporated, replaced by the sobering presence of the police and the cold reality of the morning. Elena stood by the tall windows of the main hall, watching as the authorities moved across the grounds. Yellow police tape now fluttered in the light breeze, marking off the fountain where the struggle had taken place. Several officers were busy documenting the damage to the library and the gallery, their flashlights now unnecessary but still clutched in their hands out of habit. The manor, once a fortress of secrets, was now a crime scene, open and exposed to the prying eyes of the law. In the center of the hall, Sarah Miller sat on a wooden chair, her hands cuffed behind her back. She looked nothing like the polished, aggressive businesswoman who had arrived only a day before. Her black silk dress was ruined, stained with mud and torn at the hem. Her hair was a wild mess, and her face was streaked with the remains of her makeup. She stared at the floor, her lips moving in a silent, bitter whisper. Occasionally, she would look up with a flash of her old fire, but it quickly died out when she met the eyes of the sergeant standing over her. I had a right to that money, she muttered as an officer prepared to lead her out to a waiting transport vehicle. Arthur owed it to me. Silas owed it to everyone. Arthur sat in his favorite leather armchair nearby, wrapped in a thick wool blanket. He looked older than Elena had ever seen him. The lines on his face seemed deeper, and his eyes were clouded with a profound sadness. He didn't look at Sarah as she was led away. He only watched the dust motes dancing in the first rays of sunlight. The weight of his father's legacy, which he had tried so hard to protect and then tried so desperately to exploit, had finally crushed his spirit. She's right about one thing, Elena. Arthur said softly, his voice trembling. My father did owe the world a great deal. He spent his life collecting favors and guarding truths, thinking he was doing it for the good of the valley. But all he really did was build a cage. A gilded cage for me, and a dark one for everyone else. Elena walked over to him, her own boots still caked in dried mud. She felt a deep ache in her shoulders and a fatigue that seemed to go down to her bones. The cage is open now, Arthur. The diary is in the right hands. The bank can't use those secrets to blackmail you anymore, and the Thorn Group has lost its leverage. You might lose the house, but you've regained your name. Martha emerged from the kitchen, carrying 2 mugs of hot coffee. She looked tired but calm. She had spent the last hour helping the police identify the original painting and the copy she had made. The original is safe, she told them, handing a mug to Elena. The forensic team is taking it to the City Museum for safekeeping. They say it's in remarkable condition, despite where it was hidden. Elena took a sip of the bitter, hot liquid. It felt like the first warm thing she had experienced in years. She looked around the hall, the peeling wallpaper, the flickering lights, the broken vase. The mystery of the night was over, but as she looked at the leaden box sitting on the table, she knew her work wasn't entirely finished. There was still the matter of the Thorn Group, and the names in the diary that Silas Vance had guarded so carefully. By mid-morning, the manor had become a hive of activity. Restoration experts, hired by the insurance company and the local historical society, had arrived to begin the process of drying out the basement and stabilizing the library. The sound of industrial fans now filled the lower levels, a low, mechanical hum that replaced the roar of the floodwaters. Elena stayed in the small study, away from the noise, focusing her attention on the leaden box they had recovered from the fountain. Martha joined her, having changed into a fresh set of clothes. She looked at the box with the curious eye of a historian. Silas was a man of layers, Martha said, sitting across from Elena. He didn't just hide things, he protected them with puzzles. The painting was the map, the key was the regulator, and the fountain was the vault. But why a leaden box? It's not just to keep the water out. Lead is also used to block radiation, Elena noted, but in this context, it was likely used because it doesn't rust or decay over centuries. He wanted whatever was inside to last forever. Elena opened the box again. She had already looked at the deeds and the mineral rights, but something about the weight of the box felt off. She emptied the documents onto the table and ran her fingers along the interior bottom. It was smooth, but there was a small, almost invisible seam near the corner. She used a thin metal pick from her kit to gently pry at the edge. With a soft click, the bottom of the box popped up. It was a false floor. Beneath it lay a single, velvet-lined compartment containing a small, gold-encased locket and a folded piece of parchment. Elena carefully lifted the locket. It was exquisite, featuring an engraving of a golden bird identical to the one in the painting. Inside the locket was a tiny, intricate photograph of a woman Elena didn't recognize. A woman with a striking resemblance to Martha. "Who is she?" Elena asked, handing the locket to Martha. Martha's hands shook as she looked at the image. Her eyes filled with tears. "That's my grandmother," she whispered. "She was Silas's sister. She died before I was born. My mother always told me that she and Silas had a falling out over the manor. He kept the land, and she was sent away with nothing." Elena opened the parchment. It wasn't a deed or a map. It was a letter, written in Silas Vance's firm, elegant hand. "To the one who finds this. The land is a burden, and the gold is a ghost. If you have followed the bird, it means you possess the curiosity and the heart that my son lacks. This locket represents the true inheritance, the recognition of the part of our family I tried to erase. To the descendants of my sister, Elizabeth, I have left a trust in a bank in Switzerland. The key to that trust is the locket itself. May you use the wealth to build what I only managed to hide." Elena looked at Martha, who was staring at the locket in disbelief. The quiet art teacher, who had been mocked by Sarah and overlooked by Arthur, was the true heir to the Vance fortune. Silas had hidden the money away from Arthur, knowing his son's weaknesses, and waited for someone with Martha's spirit to solve the mystery. He didn't leave it to Arthur because he knew Arthur would lose it to the banks or people like Thorn. Elena realized. He left it for someone who would appreciate the art and the history. Someone like you, Martha. The discovery changed everything. Martha wasn't just a guest or a suspect, she was the savior of the estate. With the Swiss Trust, she could pay off Arthur's debts, buy the manor back from the bank, and turn it into the museum she had always dreamed of. The Golden Bird hadn't just been a painting, it was a promise kept across generations. Despite the breakthrough with Martha's inheritance, a dark cloud still hung over Silver Oak Manor. Julian, the grey-suited representative of the Thorn Group, had been taken into custody, but Elena knew that men like him were rarely the top of the pyramid. While the police were busy with the physical evidence, Elena retreated to the library, which was now empty save for the smell of damp paper and the faint scent of Julian's expensive cologne. She began to look through the diary again, specifically the names Julian had mentioned, the liabilities. She realized that Silas Vance hadn't just been guarding these people, he had been monitoring them. One name appeared more frequently than the others: Marcus Thorn. According to the diary, Marcus Thorn wasn't just a rival, he was the son of Silas's former business partner. Years ago, Silas and the elder Thorn had been involved in a project to develop the valley. Silas wanted to preserve the land, while Thorn wanted to strip it for minerals. Silas had used the favors he collected to block Thorn's plans, eventually driving the man into bankruptcy. Marcus Thorn had spent the last 20 years rebuilding that empire, driven by a vendetta against the Vance family. It wasn't just about the money for Thorn. Elena thought, her pen flying across her notepad. It was about revenge. He wanted to take the manor, the land, and the secret Silas used to destroy his father. As she searched Julian's discarded briefcase, which the police had missed in their initial sweep of the gallery, she found a hidden pocket. Inside was a small, high-tech tracking device and a series of photographs. The photos weren't of the painting or the manor. They were of Elena. They had been following her since she left the city. They knew Arthur had hired a detective, and they had used the storm as a cover to move their pieces into place. Julian hadn't just been looking for the diary, he was there to clean up anyone who got in the way. A soft knock on the library door made Elena jump. It was Victor, his head still bandaged, but his color was returning. He looked at the photographs in Elena's hand and his expression hardened. "They're not going to stop, are they?" Victor asked. "Even with Julian in jail, Thorn will send someone else." "Probably," Elena said, standing up. "But now we have something they don't think we have. We have the diary, and we have the deeds. And more importantly, we have the truth about Silas's sister. Martha is the legal owner now, or she will be soon. Thorn can't bully her the way he bullied Arthur." "What's your next move, Elena?" Victor asked. "I'm going to find Marcus Thorn," Elena said, her voice filled with a new resolve. "He thinks he can operate in the shadows, but I'm going to bring the same light to his organization that I brought to this house. The mystery of Silver Oak Manor is solved, but the story of the Thorn Group is just beginning." Elena looked out the window. The sun was high now, and the valley was beautiful, even in its battered state. She had come here to find a painting, but she had found a family's soul. She packed her black bag, ready to head back to the city. She had a new client now, herself, and a new target. The Golden Bird had finally flown, but its journey was far from over. The morning air was crisp and carried the scent of wet pine and ozone, a lingering reminder of the storm that had nearly dismantled the history of the Vance family. Elena stood by her car, a reliable but mud-spattered sedan that looked entirely out of place against the backdrop of the grand, battered manor. She tossed her black bag into the passenger seat, the weight of the diary and the documents she had duplicated pressing against her mind more than the physical gravity of the items. Arthur Vance walked down the front steps slowly. He didn't use his cane as a crutch this time. He held it more like a gentleman's accessory, a sign that his pride was beginning to heal even as his fortune shifted hands. Beside him stood Martha, her posture entirely transformed. She no longer looked like the mousy art teacher who lived in the shadows of great works. She looked like the guardian Silas Vance had always hoped for. The locket she wore around her neck caught the morning light, a golden spark of lineage and responsibility. "You're sure you won't stay for a proper breakfast, Elena?" Martha asked, her voice warm. "The cook is finally back, and the kitchen is dry. We owe you more than just a fee." Elena smiled, leaning against her car door. "I appreciate the offer, Martha. Truly. But mysteries have a way of trailing after me, and right now, there's a trail leading back to the city that I need to catch before it goes cold. Besides, you have a manor to run and a Swiss trust to manage. I think you'll be plenty busy." Arthur stepped forward and took Elena's hand, his grip firm. "You saved my life, and more importantly, you saved my father's soul. I spent years thinking he was a tyrant who wanted me to fail. Now I see he was just waiting for someone to be worthy. Thank you for showing me the difference." "Take care of yourself, Arthur," Elena said. "And keep an eye on the drainage hub. We wouldn't want the basement turning into a swimming pool again." As she drove down the long, winding driveway, Elena watched the manor shrink in her rearview mirror. The stone walls, once so imposing and full of dread, now looked merely old and peaceful. However, as she reached the main road, she noticed a black SUV parked on the shoulder. Its windows were tinted dark, and its engine was idling, a thin plume of exhaust rising into the air. As Elena passed, the SUV pulled out slowly, maintaining a precise distance behind her. She checked her mirrors, her pulse quickening. This wasn't a coincidence. The storm had provided a veil for the Thorn Group's direct assault, but the open road offered no such protection. She reached for her phone, activating a secure, encrypted line she used for high-risk cases. "This is Elena," she said to the automated recording system of her agency. "Exiting Silver Oak Manor. I have the data, but I've picked up a tail. One black SUV, no visible plates. If I don't check in by noon, initiate the Thorn Protocol." The drive back to the city usually took 3 hours, but today it felt like an eternity. The highway stretched out before her, a ribbon of grey through the green valley. Every time she rounded a bend, the SUV was there. They weren't trying to hide. They were sending a message. "We are here, and we are waiting." Elena focused on the road, her mind already analyzing the contents of the diary. Silas Vance had known that Thorn would come for the manor eventually. He had left behind enough information to ruin a dozen empires, and Elena was now the courier of that destruction. She glanced at the bag on the seat. The golden bird had flown, but the hawk was now in pursuit. The skyline of the city rose up like a jagged wall of glass and steel, reflecting the midday sun in a blinding display of modern power. For Elena, the transition from the ancient, brooding atmosphere of Silver Oak Manor to the sterile, high-tech bustle of the metropolitan center was jarring. She navigated the congested streets with the practiced ease of a local, her eyes constantly flitting to the rearview mirror. The black SUV had vanished somewhere near the industrial district, but Elena wasn't fooled. They hadn't given up, they had simply handed the baton to a more discreet team. She pulled into the underground parking garage of her office building, a sleek skyscraper that housed some of the most specialized private intelligence firms in the country. Her office was small but fortified, far more than a simple detective's den. It was a clean, minimalist space filled with high-end servers, encrypted monitors, and a wall of glass that overlooked the city's financial heart. Elena sat at her desk and immediately began the process of digitizing Silas Vance's diary. Using a high-resolution scanner with text recognition, she watched as 30 years of secrets were converted into a searchable database. The name she had seen earlier began to pop up with alarming frequency. It wasn't just a list of favors. It was a map of a shadow government that had been quietly influencing the state's economy for decades. "Let's see what you're so afraid of, Mr. Thorn," Elena muttered, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. She ran a cross-reference between the names in the diary and the current board members of the Thorn Group. The results were staggering. 3 of the men Silas had protected were now high-level executives under Marcus Thorn. They weren't just business associates. They were under Thorn's thumb because he had inherited the leverage Silas once held, or so he thought. Suddenly, her secure line chirped. An incoming call from an unknown, encrypted source. Elena hesitated, then tapped the speaker. "You've been very busy, Ms. Elena," a voice said. It was smooth, devoid of emotion, and carried the unmistakable weight of someone used to being obeyed. It wasn't Julian. This was the man himself, Marcus Thorn. "I could say the same for you, Marcus," Elena replied, leaning back in her chair. "Sending a hit team to a manor during a 100-year storm. That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? It lacks the finesse I heard your father was famous for." A cold silence followed her remark. When Thorn spoke again, his voice had dropped an octave. "My father was a dreamer who died in debt because of Silas Vance. I am a realist. You have something that belongs to my family's history. The diary is not yours to hold. Actually, according to the laws of inheritance, it belongs to Martha Vance." Elena countered. "And I'm just the temporary librarian. If you want it back, you're going to have to do a lot better than a grey-suited puppet and a black SUV. You think you're safe in that glass box of yours," Thorn said, his tone turning predatory. "But glass is fragile, Elena. You've spent the night in a haunted house, but you have no idea what it's like to live in a world where every shadow belongs to me. I'll give you 24 hours to hand over the diary. After that, the Thorn protocol you mentioned to your service. Well, I think you'll find that I have a protocol of my own." The line went dead. Elena stared at the monitor, where the face of Marcus Thorn stared back at her. He looked like a king, but Elena saw the cracks. He was desperate. He needed that diary to keep his associates in line. Without it, his empire was a house of cards. Challenge accepted. Elena whispered. She turned to her computer and began drafting a very public, very dangerous email. The sun began to set over the city, turning the glass towers into pillars of fire. Elena hadn't left her office. She had spent the afternoon preparing her counter-offensive. If Marcus Thorn wanted to play a game of shadows, she would simply turn on the lights. She knew that Thorn relied on the secrecy of his leverage. If the world knew that the Thorn Group was built on a foundation of blackmail and stolen favors, his investors would vanish overnight. She finished her draft, a detailed summary of the list in Silas's diary, backed by the scanned documents from the leaden box. She didn't send it to the police or the newspapers yet. She needed a catalyst. She needed Thorn to move first so she could catch him in the act. Elena grabbed her jacket and her bag, leaving a decoy set of files on her desk. She took the service elevator down to the basement, exiting through a side door used by the building's maintenance staff. She was now on foot, a ghost in the urban landscape. She walked toward a crowded plaza in the center of the financial district. It was a place of neon lights, giant holographic advertisements, and thousands of people rushing home. It was the perfect place to hide, and the perfect place to set a trap. She found a seat at an outdoor cafe, ordered a coffee, and pulled out a small, high-frequency transmitter. "Come and get me, Marcus," she murmured. She activated the transmitter. It was a beacon, broadcasting a signal that Thorn's technical team would recognize as the source of the diary's digital files. Within minutes, she saw them. 2 men in nondescript coats, moving through the crowd with the focused intent of hunters. They were looking at their phones, tracking the signal. Elena waited until they were only 20 feet away. She stood up and walked toward a public transit station. The station was a labyrinth of glass tunnels and fast-moving trains. She swiped her pass and entered the platform, the two men following close behind. She led them through 3 different levels, moving deeper into the belly of the city. Finally, she stopped in a quiet corridor near the baggage lockers. She turned around, a calm smile on her face. "You guys are a bit slow," Elena said as the 2 men stepped into the light. "I've been waiting for you since the cafe." One of the men reached into his jacket, but Elena held up her phone. "I wouldn't. This phone is currently connected to a livestream server. If my heart rate exceeds a certain level, or if the connection is cut, the entire contents of Silas Vance's diary go live on every major news network in the country. Your boss wouldn't like that." The men froze. They were professionals, but they weren't paid to trigger a global scandal. "Tell Marcus I'm not running," Elena continued, her voice echoing in the tiled corridor. "I'm inviting him to a meeting. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., at the museum where the Golden Bird is currently being held. Tell him to come alone, or the bird flies for real this time." She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked toward the arriving train, leaving the 2 men standing in the silence of the station. She had made her move. She had moved the pieces from the manor to the museum, and now, the final act was set. The Golden Bird had brought them together, and in the presence of the painting, the truth would finally be told. The Metropolitan Museum of Fine Arts was a fortress of culture, a labyrinth of white marble and hushed whispers. At 8:45 a.m., the grand halls were mostly empty, save for the occasional janitor buffing the floors to a mirror shine. Elena stood in the center of the 19th century wing, her back to the entrance. Before her, under a specialized spotlight that made the oil paint shimmer like liquid fire, hung the original Golden Bird. It looked different here. In the damp, decaying walls of Silver Oak Manor, the painting had felt like a ghost. Here, surrounded by other masterpieces, it felt like a king. The gold of the bird's feathers seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a testament to Silas Vance's obsession and the secret he had hidden behind the blue forest. "It's a magnificent piece, isn't it?" Elena didn't turn around. She knew that voice. It was deeper and more resonant than the one on the phone, carrying the weight of generational wealth and a ruthless lack of empathy. Marcus Thorne stepped into the light. He was dressed in a charcoal grey suit that cost more than most people's cars, his silver hair slicked back. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a statesman. "It is," Elena replied, finally turning to face him. "Though I think you're more interested in what was behind the canvas than the art itself." Thorne walked up to the velvet rope, his eyes tracing the lines of the bird. "My father spent his final years staring at a photograph of this painting, Elena. He believed Silas Vance had stolen his future. He wasn't wrong. Silas was a man who used the law as a weapon to dismantle anyone who stood in the way of his vision for the valley. And you've spent your life doing the same," Elena countered. "Only you didn't use the law. You used debt, blackmail, and people like Julian." Thorne smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The diary. Elena. Where is it? You've made your point. You've brought me here, into the light. But the light is a fickle thing. It can be extinguished in a heartbeat." "The diary is safe," Elena said. "But more importantly, the contents are being processed. I didn't just find a list of favors, Marcus. I found the Thorne-Vance Agreement of 1954. Your father didn't lose the land because of a grudge. He lost it because he tried to sell the valley's water rights to a chemical conglomerate that would have poisoned the entire region. Silas didn't steal his future, he saved everyone else's." Thorne's expression darkened. The refined mask began to slip, revealing the jagged edge of the man underneath. "History is written by the victors, detective. And today, I am the one with the resources. You are alone in a room with a painting. Do you really think you're leaving here with that data?" The silence of the museum felt heavy, as if the statues in the corridors were holding their breath. Elena stood her ground, her hand resting casually in her coat pocket. She knew Thorn's men were likely stationed at every exit, waiting for a signal. "I'm not as alone as you think, Marcus," Elena said. "You see, Silas Vance was paranoid for a reason. He knew that one day, a Thorn would come back to finish what his father started. That's why he didn't just leave the diary to Arthur. He left a contingency." From the shadows of a nearby archway, a figure emerged. It wasn't a police officer or a hired guard. It was Martha Vance. She was dressed in a sharp, professional suit, her hair pulled back, the silver locket glowing against her neck. She didn't look like a frightened teacher anymore. She looked like a woman who had just realized she owned the ground everyone was standing on. "Mr. Thorn," Martha said, her voice steady and clear. "I believe you've been trying to foreclose on my family's property. My lawyer has spent the morning reviewing the documents Elena recovered from the fountain. It seems the debts your company claims Arthur owes were settled 30 years ago through a trust my grandfather established." Thorn turned to Martha, his eyes narrowing. "And who are you supposed to be?" "Another of Arthur's pathetic hangers-on. I am the legal executor of the Silas Vance estate," Martha replied, stepping forward to stand beside Elena. "And as of 2 hours ago, the Swiss trust has been activated. The Thorn Group no longer holds a single cent of debt over Silver Oak Manor. In fact, we've begun the process of suing your firm for predatory lending and harassment." Thorn let out a cold, sharp laugh. "You think a few old papers and a trust fund can stop me? I have influence in departments you can't even name. By tomorrow, those documents will be declared forgeries, and your trust will be frozen in litigation for a decade." "That would be true," Elena interrupted, "if the documents were the only thing we had. But we also have the list. The diary doesn't just name people Silas helped. It names the people your father bribed to help him destroy the valley. And several of those names are still on your board of directors today, Marcus. If that list goes public, your company won't just face litigation. It will face a total collapse of its stock." Thorn's hands tightened into fists at his sides. The power dynamic had shifted. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the one standing in the trap. The tension in the gallery was at a breaking point. Marcus Thorn looked between Elena and Martha, his mind clearly calculating the cost of a violent exit versus the cost of a scandal. He reached for his phone, but Elena held up a small, black remote. "I wouldn't," she warned. "The museum security system is currently patched into my server. If I press this button, the entire contents of the diary, including the evidence of your father's environmental crimes, will be uploaded to every major news outlet and the Environmental Protection Agency. You'll be famous, Marcus. But not the way you wanted." Thorn stared at her, his face a mask of calculated fury. "You're playing a dangerous game, detective. You destroy my company, and you destroy the livelihoods of thousands of people. All for a pile of old secrets and a piece of land that nobody wants. The people of the valley want it," Martha said. "And the history of this house deserves to be more than a footnote in your portfolio." Thorn looked at the golden bird one last time. He saw the defeat in its gilded feathers. He knew that in the digital age, a secret could travel faster than a bullet. He let out a long, slow breath, his posture slumping slightly. The fire of the vendetta had finally met a wall of cold, hard facts. "This isn't over," Thorn whispered, though the threat lacked its previous weight. "You've won a battle, Elena. But the world is full of men like me. You can't protect everyone." "Maybe not," Elena replied. "But I can protect this bird." As Thorn turned and walked away, disappearing into the marble depths of the museum, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the main entrance. It was the police, led by the same sergeant from the manor. They weren't there for Thorn. Not yet. They were there to secure the painting and take the official statements. Elena leaned against the wall, the exhaustion of the last 48 hours finally hitting her like a physical blow. Martha turned to her, a small, genuine smile on her face. "We did it, Elena," Martha said. "The manor is safe. Arthur is, well, he's Arthur, but he's free. And the bird is back where it belongs." "It was a team effort, Martha," Elena said, looking at the painting. "Silas knew what he was doing. He just needed the right people to find the truth." The mystery of Silver Oak Manor was essentially solved. The villain had been thwarted, and the legacy was restored. But as Elena looked out at the city through the museum's glass roof, she knew that the ripples from Silas Vance's diary would be felt for a long time. The weeks following the museum standoff were a whirlwind of legal filings, forensic audits, and a very public dismantling of the Thorn Group. As Elena had predicted, the list from Silas Vance's diary acted like a surgical strike against the city's corrupt underbelly. With the federal government now in possession of the original documents, Marcus Thorne's associates turned on him with the speed of starving wolves. Julian, realizing his boss would never pay for his defense, became the prosecution's star witness. Elena sat in her office, feet propped up on her desk, watching a news segment about the seizure of Thorne's corporate assets. The reporter stood in front of a glass building, the same one Elena had looked at while drafting her ultimatum, as federal agents carried out boxes of evidence. The Thorne protocol had worked, though not in the way Marcus had intended. The mighty have fallen, and they've made quite a mess on the way down, Elena remarked to her empty office. A knock at the door preceded the arrival of Victor. He looked much better. The bandages were gone, replaced by a faint, roguish scar near his temple. He was dressed in a simple, well-fitted suit and carried a small wooden crate. "I'm officially out of the driving business, Elena," Victor said, placing the crate on her desk. "Martha has hired me as the head of security and operations for the Silver Oak Cultural Center. It turns out, after guarding a haunted house for a year, I'm overqualified for most entry-level positions." Elena laughed, reaching for the crate. "And what's this?" "A retirement gift. A thank you from Arthur and Martha," Victor replied. "They wanted you to have the first edition of the new catalog, and a little something extra Silas left behind that they thought you'd appreciate." Elena opened the crate. Inside was a beautifully printed book detailing the history of the Vance collection. Tucked into the back cover was a small, silver bird, a pin, identical to the one she had seen missing from Arthur's jacket during their confrontation. It was the Guardian's mark. "The legal battle for the manor is over," Victor continued. "Martha used the Swiss trust to clear the remaining liens. The bank was so embarrassed by their connection to Thorne that they settled for pennies on the dollar. Arthur has moved into a smaller, sunnier wing of the house. He spends most of his time reading the diary. He says he's trying to learn how to be a guardian instead of a collector." "And Sarah?" Elena asked. "Doing 15 to 20 for the assault and her role in the Thorne racketeering," Victor said, his expression sobering. "She's finally got the life of luxury she wanted. 3 meals a day and a very sturdy roof over her head. Just not in the zip code she planned." Elena turned the silver pin over in her hand. The case had started as a simple theft, but it had ended as an exorcism. She had cleared the ghosts from Silver Oak Manor, and in doing so, she had found a rare thing in her line of work, a happy ending that was actually earned. 6 months later, Silver Oak Manor looked like a different world. The scaffolding that had covered the west wing was gone, and the stone walls had been scrubbed clean of decades of grime and neglect. The gardens, once a maze of mud and shadow, were now a vibrant tapestry of wildflowers and carefully manicured paths. The fountain, fully restored, hummed with a gentle, rhythmic splash that no longer sounded like a warning. It was the night of the grand reopening gala. Elena stood on the terrace, a glass of sparkling water in her hand, wearing a dark emerald dress that managed to be both elegant and practical enough for a quick getaway. The house was filled with music, laughter, and the soft chatter of the city's elite. The ones who hadn't ended up on Silas's list, at least. "You look like you're waiting for something to go wrong," a voice said. Elena turned to see Martha Vance. She was radiant in a gold-toned gown, the ancestral locket resting proudly against her collarbone. She looked like she belonged at the head of the stairs, a true matriarch of the valley. "Occupational hazard, Martha," Elena replied with a wink. "I keep expecting a masked thief to swing from the chandelier or for the floor to open into a secret passage." "Well, the secret passages are all alarmed now, thanks to Victor." Martha laughed. "And the only things swinging from the chandeliers are the new lights. We're officially a green estate now. Silas would probably hate it, but the valley loves it." They walked together into the gallery. The golden bird was back in its place of honor, but it wasn't alone. Surrounding it were Martha's own sketches and the copper map Elena had rescued from Arthur's desk. The display didn't just show the art, it told the story of the mystery. It showed the truth that Silas had hidden. Arthur joined them, looking remarkably healthy. He held a glass of cider and smiled at the painting. "You know, Elena, I used to think this bird was a weight. I thought it was the thing that kept me tethered to a dying name. But seeing it here, with the sun setting behind it, it doesn't look like it's being held captive anymore." "It isn't, Arthur," Elena said. "It's finally doing what a bird is supposed to do. It's guiding people." As the gala continued into the night, Elena slipped away from the crowd. She walked down to the fountain, the silver bird pin glinting on her lapel. She looked at the stone bird atop the pillar, its reconstructed wings seamless in the moonlight. She had done her job. The inheritance was settled, the villain was behind bars, and the house was full of light. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A new message from her agency. New lead. Coastal estate. Missing heir and a locked room mystery involving a clockwork heart. Interested? Elena looked back at the manor one last time. She smiled, the thrill of the hunt already stirring in her chest. "Always," she murmured to the night air. She walked toward her car, the sound of her shoes clicking rhythmically on the stone path. The golden bird had finished its flight, but for Elena, the sky was just opening up. And as she drove away, the engine purring like a satisfied cat, she couldn't help but think that Silas Vance would have appreciated the timing. After all, every good mystery deserves a sequel, as long as the detective knows when to make an exit.